Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step away from the counter. The words sliced through the marble lobby like a blade, turning every head toward the black woman in the modest dress who dared to ask for her own money. Naomi Brooks stood perfectly still as the branch manager's smile grew sharper, his voice louder, his judgment faster than any computer system could process a transaction. In that moment, she wasn't a customer. She was a problem to be removed. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the woman he was about to humiliate controlled every dollar in that building, and the next 7 minutes would cost him everything. If you're ready to see how this unfolds, stay with me until the end. And drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The morning started the way most Tuesdays did for Naomi Brooks, with coffee that was too strong and a calendar that was too full. She sat in her home office, the kind of space that didn't scream wealth but whispered it in the details. First edition books lining custom shelves, a desk made from reclaimed wood that cost more than most people's cars, windows overlooking a garden that required a full-time staff she never mentioned to anyone. Her phone buzzed. Another meeting request. Another crisis that required her personal attention. Another day of being the person everyone called when the impossible needed to happen. Naomi Brooks was the CEO of Pinnacle Financial Group, a position she'd held for 3 years after 2 decades of clawing her way up from a teller position in a branch, not unlike the one she was about to visit. She'd built her reputation on being everywhere and nowhere, known in boardrooms, invisible on streets. Her face rarely appeared in press releases. She preferred it that way. It gave her freedom to see things as they really were, not as people presented them when they knew who was watching. Today, she had a specific purpose, a routine withdrawal from a branch she'd never visited, in a neighborhood where Pinnacle had recently expanded. The withdrawal itself was simple, $20,000 in cash for a private purchase that didn't require corporate oversight or paper trails. Legal. Personal. None of anyone's business but hers. She dressed simply. A navy dress from a department store, comfortable flats, a handbag that had seen better years. No jewelry except her wedding band. No designer labels. Nothing that would signal wealth to anyone who judged books by their covers. Her driver offered to take her. She declined. This wasn't a corporate visit. This was personal banking, the kind of thing that should be simple for anyone with a valid account and proper identification. The branch stood on a corner that had gentrified rapidly over the past 5 years. Coffee shops with minimalist signs had replaced corner stores. Boutiques selling $20 candles occupied spaces where laundromats used to be. The Pinnacle Financial branch gleamed with new construction, all glass and steel and statements about progress. Naomi pushed through the doors at 10:47 a.m. The lobby was designed to impress. High ceilings, marble floors that clicked with every step, teller stations that looked more like hotel concierge desks than banking counters. Digital screens displayed stock tickers and promotional materials for wealth management services. Everything was clean, modern, aspirational. And empty, except for 3 tellers, 2 customers being helped, and a branch manager who stood near the office doors like a guard watching his territory. Naomi approached the nearest available teller, a young woman named Jessica, according to her nameplate. The teller looked up with a professional smile that flickered for just a moment when she took in Naomi's appearance. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" "I'd like to make a withdrawal, please." Naomi's voice was calm, friendly, the tone of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "Of course. Do you have an account with us?" Naomi slid her ID and account card across the counter. "I do." Jessica took the cards, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Her eyes went to the screen, then back to the cards, then to the screen again. The professional smile tightened slightly. "And how much were you looking to withdraw today?" $20,000, please." The typing stopped. Jessica's eyes widened just enough to notice. 20,000? That's correct. In cash? Yes, please. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but it stretched like taffy. Naomi watched Jessica's expression shift through several micro-movements: surprise, uncertainty, suspicion. The teller glanced toward the branch manager, then back at her screen. "Ma'am, that's quite a large amount. Can I ask what the withdrawal is for?" Naomi's smile remained polite, but something cooled behind her eyes. It's for a personal purchase. I see. Jessica's fingers weren't moving anymore. It's just that for withdrawals of this size, we typically require advance notice for security purposes. I understand. However, this is my money in my account, and I'd like to withdraw it today. Of course, I just need to verify a few things. Jessica picked up the phone, her voice dropping to a murmur as she spoke to someone Naomi couldn't hear. The other customers in the lobby were starting to notice. A man in a business suit at the next counter glanced over. An elderly woman waiting in the sitting area looked up from her phone. Jessica hung up and tried another smile, this one more strained. My manager will be right with you. He just needs to approve the transaction. I see. Naomi didn't move from the counter. Is there a problem with my account? No, no problem at all. This is just standard procedure for large cash withdrawals. Naomi knew what standard procedure actually looked like. She'd written half the policies herself. This wasn't it. The branch manager approached with the kind of walk that announced authority before words could. He was in his early 40s, white, with hair gelled into submission, and a suit that was expensive enough to notice but not expensive enough to impress. His name tag read, Mitchell Harrington, branch manager. Good morning. His voice was loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. I understand you're requesting a rather substantial withdrawal? $20,000 from my account. Yes. Mitchell's smile was all teeth and no warmth. And may I ask what this withdrawal is for? A personal purchase? I see. And what type of purchase requires $20,000 in cash? Naomi's expression didn't change. A personal one. Ma'am, I'm sure you understand that we have protocols in place to protect our customers from fraud and theft. Large cash withdrawals raise certain red flags. Red flags for what exactly? Well, we need to ensure that you're not being coerced, that this is genuinely your money, that I have the right to access my own account. Mitchell's smile tightened. Of course you have the right, assuming everything checks out. But I'm sure you can understand our position. We can't simply hand over $20,000 to just anyone who walks in. The words hung in the air like smoke. Just anyone. The elderly woman in the waiting area shifted uncomfortably. Jessica, the teller, suddenly found something fascinating on her computer screen. I'm not just anyone, Naomi said quietly. I'm an account holder requesting access to my own funds. And we'll be happy to help you once we've completed our verification process. Mitchell gestured toward his office. Why don't we step into my office where we can discuss this more privately? I'd prefer to complete the transaction here. Ma'am, I really think it would be better. Is there a problem with my identification? No, but is there a problem with my account? We just need to verify. What exactly needs to be verified that my ID and account card don't already confirm? Mitchell's smile disappeared entirely. Ma'am, I'm trying to help you here. If you just cooperate with our security procedures, I am cooperating. I've provided my identification and clearly stated my request. What I'm asking for is standard banking service. A man in an expensive suit walked through the door, immediately greeted by another teller with a warm smile. Mr. Patterson, so good to see you. How can we help you today? Naomi watched as Mr. Patterson requested a withdrawal of $15,000 and was processed without a single additional question. His transaction completed in under 4 minutes with smiles and pleasantries. She turned back to Mitchell. Interesting. His jaw tightened. Every customer's situation is unique. Clearly. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step away from the counter. The words were loud enough to stop conversations across the lobby. Every eye turned toward them. Jessica took a small step back. The other tellers suddenly became very busy with paperwork. Naomi didn't move. Excuse me? You're disrupting the normal flow of business, and if you're not willing to comply with our security procedures, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I've complied with every legitimate procedure. I've provided identification. I've stated my request clearly. What I haven't done is accept being treated differently than other customers. Ma'am, I don't appreciate your tone. And I don't appreciate being profiled. Mitchell's face flushed. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious observation. I think you should leave now. I think I should receive the same service as every other customer in this branch. Security! Mitchell's voice cracked slightly as he raised it. We need security to the lobby. A guard emerged from the back corridor, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s who looked deeply uncomfortable with the situation unfolding before him. Sir? This woman is refusing to leave and making baseless accusations. I need her escorted from the building. Naomi stood perfectly still, her hands visible, her posture relaxed, her voice calm when she spoke. I'm a customer attempting to make a legitimate withdrawal from my account. I've broken no laws and violated no policies. The security guard looked between them, clearly trying to assess what was actually happening. Ma'am, if the manager is asking you to leave, on what grounds? What have I done that warrants removal? Mitchell stepped closer. You're being disruptive and uncooperative. I'm asking for equal service. You're looking for problems where none exist. Then why was Mr. Patterson's $15,000 withdrawal processed in 4 minutes with no additional questions? That's different. How? He's a known customer with an established relationship. I have an account here. That makes me a customer. A customer who's behaving suspiciously. By asking for my own money? The other customers weren't even pretending not to watch anymore. The elderly woman had her phone out, though whether she was recording or just holding it was unclear. Jessica and the other tellers stood frozen, witnesses to a scene none of them wanted to be part of. Mitchell's voice dropped to something that tried to sound reasonable but came out condescending. Look, I understand you may feel frustrated, but I'm simply doing my job. If you would just answer a few questions about the source of these funds, the nature of your employment, and the source of these funds is my account. The nature of my employment is none of your business for a standard withdrawal. Everything becomes my business when a customer exhibits suspicious behavior. What behavior? Walking in and requesting my money? The amount, the lack of advance notice, your reaction to reasonable questions? Your reasonable questions weren't asked of Mr. Patterson. Every situation is different. How convenient. Mitchell's hand moved toward his phone. I'm calling the police. For what crime? Trespassing. I've asked you to leave and you've refused. Naomi reached into her purse. The security guard's hand twitched toward his belt. She moved slowly, deliberately, pulling out not a weapon, but a phone. Before you do that, she said quietly, I'm going to make a call of my own. Mitchell laughed, a sharp sound without humor. Call whoever you want. The police will be here in 5 minutes. Naomi's finger hovered over a contact in her phone. She looked at Mitchell, really looked at him, giving him one last chance to see what he was missing. His expression showed only irritation and self-righteousness, the absolute certainty of someone who'd never been meaningfully challenged. She pressed the call button. It rang once. Ms. Brooks? The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, immediately attentive. James, I'm at the Riverside branch. I need you and Catherine at this location immediately. Bring security footage access and HR protocols for immediate termination. Mitchell's smirk faltered slightly. Who are you calling? Naomi kept her eyes on him. Also contact legal. We'll need documentation of today's events and a full review of this branch's service patterns over the past 6 months. I want demographic data on every customer interaction. Who the hell do you think you're talking to? Mitchell's voice rose again. Understood, James said on the other end. We're 7 minutes out. 7 minutes is fine. Naomi ended the call and slipped her phone back into her purse. She looked at Mitchell with an expression that wasn't anger or satisfaction, just a kind of tired recognition. You have 7 minutes to reconsider how this morning has unfolded. Are you threatening me? Mitchell sputtered. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I know exactly who I'm dealing with. The question is whether you do. The next 7 minutes moved like honey. Mitchell paced near his office, phone in hand, presumably calling the police as promised. The security guard stood awkwardly between Naomi and the door, clearly uncertain about whether there was actually a threat to guard against. Jessica and the other tellers whispered among themselves, stealing glances at the woman who refused to leave. Naomi remained at the counter, not defiant, not aggressive, just present. She checked her phone once, responded to an email. Breathed steadily while the lobby filled with the kind of tension that makes air feel thick. Other customers came and went. Some sensed the atmosphere and hurried through their transactions. Others lingered, curious about the standoff they'd wandered into. At minute 4, Mitchell returned to the lobby. "The police are on their way. I really think it would be better for everyone if you just left voluntarily." "I'm sure you do." "This doesn't have to be a scene. You made it a scene when you treated me differently than other customers. I treated you exactly as protocol requires." "We'll see." At minute 6, 2 police officers entered the lobby. They approached Mitchell first, who immediately launched into an explanation about a disruptive customer refusing to leave private property. Naomi waited. The officers approached her professionally, hands visible but ready. "Ma'am, the manager says you've been asked to leave." "That's correct." "Are you refusing to leave?" "I'm waiting for this situation to resolve appropriately." "Ma'am, if you've been asked to leave private property..." "Officers." Naomi's voice remained calm. "I'd appreciate if you'd wait approximately 90 seconds before taking any action. I believe the situation is about to clarify itself." The officers exchanged glances. One of them, a woman in her 30s, studied Naomi's face with something like recognition trying to surface. At minute 7, the lobby doors opened. 2 people entered, moving with the kind of purpose that shifts room dynamics instantly. The man was tall, black, in his 50s, wearing a suit that made Mitchell's look like a rental. The woman beside him was white, sharp-featured, her eyes already cataloging every detail of the scene before her. James Richardson and Catherine Valdez, Pinnacle Financial Group's Chief Operating Officer and Chief Human Resources Officer, respectively. They crossed the lobby in silence. Every teller straightened. Mitchell's expression shifted from irritation to confusion to the first whisper of fear. James stopped 3 feet from Naomi. "Ms. Brooks?" The lobby went absolutely silent. "James?" Naomi's voice was perfectly composed. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Mitchell's face drained of color. "Ms. Brooks?" Catherine pulled out a tablet, already pulling up files, footage, data. "We have the security recordings from this morning ready for review." The female police officer's eyes widened. "Wait, Ms. Brooks as in..." "Naomi Brooks," James said, his voice carrying across the lobby like a bell. "Chief Executive Officer of Pinnacle Financial Group. The woman who owns every dollar in this building and employs every person in this branch." Mitchell swayed slightly, his hand reaching for the counter for support. The world tilted on its axis, and 7 minutes became the longest and shortest span of his professional life. Naomi finally stepped away from the counter, her movements unhurried. She looked at Mitchell with an expression that held no triumph, no anger, just a kind of weary acknowledgement of patterns that repeated too often and lasted too long. "Now," she said quietly, "let's talk about what happened here this morning." The silence that followed James Richardson's declaration felt like the moment after lightning strikes, when the air itself holds its breath waiting for thunder. Mitchell's hand gripped the counter so tightly his knuckles went white. Jessica took an involuntary step backward, her face cycling through shock, horror, and the desperate mathematics of whether she'd be caught in whatever was about to happen. The security guard's shoulders sagged as he realized he'd been seconds away from physically removing the CEO of the entire corporation from one of her own branches. The 2 police officers stood frozen, their training warring with the absurdity of the situation. The female officer spoke first, her voice carefully neutral. "Ma'am, it seems there's been a misunderstanding." Naomi turned to her with a slight nod. "Not a misunderstanding, officer, a very clear understanding of exactly how certain customers are treated in this branch." She gestured toward Mitchell, who looked like he might vomit. "Mr. Harrington understood perfectly well what he was doing when he questioned my right to access my own account, demanded explanations I didn't owe him, and called security to remove me for requesting the same service he provided to Mr. Patterson without hesitation." Catherine was already scrolling through footage on her tablet, her expression growing colder with each swipe. "We have 47 minutes of interaction recorded, starting from when Ms. Brooks entered the branch at 10:47 a.m. "I don't need to see it," Naomi said quietly. "I lived it." James turned to Mitchell with the kind of look that could freeze water. "Mr. Harrington, I'm going to ask you some very simple questions, and I need you to answer them honestly. Do you understand?" Mitchell nodded, his voice barely working. "Yes, sir." When Ms. Brooks approached the counter and requested a $20,000 withdrawal, what was your first concern? I. The amount was large, and that's not what I asked. What was your first concern when you looked at her? The lobby was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning sounded like wind. Mitchell's eyes darted around, looking for escape routes that didn't exist. I wanted to ensure the transaction was legitimate. Did you want to ensure Mr. Patterson's $15,000 withdrawal was legitimate? That was different. How? Mitchell's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Catherine looked up from her tablet. According to the records I'm seeing, Mr. Patterson has made 3 withdrawals of $10,000 or more in the past 4 months. None required managerial approval. None involved questions about the purpose of the withdrawal. She swiped again. In fact, in the past 6 months, this branch has processed 41 cash withdrawals over $10,000. Only 7 were flagged for additional verification. Would you like to guess the demographic pattern? Mitchell's face had gone from pale to gray. I follow protocol. Protocol. James repeated the word like it tasted rotten. Let's talk about protocol. Pinnacle Financial Group has very clear guidelines about when additional verification is required for large withdrawals. Those guidelines involve account history, transaction patterns, and specific red flags like sudden account changes or unusual activity. They do not involve the branch manager's gut feeling about who looks trustworthy. One of the other tellers, a young man Naomi hadn't interacted with, slowly raised his hand like a student in class. James noticed. Yes? Sir, Mr. Harrington told us to watch for certain types of customers. He said we needed to be extra careful with people who looked like they might be. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Might be what? Catherine's voice was sharp as glass. The teller's eyes went to Naomi, then away, ashamed. He didn't say it directly. He just said we'd know them when we saw them. Jessica found her voice small and shaking. He showed us articles about money laundering and fraud, said certain communities were higher risk, made us watch for warning signs. What warning signs? James asked. Expensive requests from people who didn't look like they had money. Large cash withdrawals from people who seemed nervous. Customers who got defensive when we asked questions. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. I thought we were protecting the bank. Naomi felt something crack in her chest, not quite breaking, but definitely fracturing. This girl, barely out of college, had been trained to see threatened people who looked like Naomi herself, trained to equate modest clothing with suspicious poverty, to interpret legitimate frustration as defensive behavior, to believe that protection meant prejudice. How long have you worked here? Naomi asked her directly. Jessica jumped at being addressed. 4 months? And in those 4 months, how many customers who looked like me have you served without incident? I don't know. Guess. Jessica's voice was almost a whisper. Maybe a dozen? And how many of them were trying to commit fraud? None that I know of. So the warning signs you were taught to watch for, did any of them actually indicate criminal behavior? Jessica shook her head, tears now streaming down her face. No, ma'am. Naomi turned back to Mitchell. You didn't just fail to serve me today. You taught your staff to fail. You created a culture where discrimination masquerades as diligence, where bias hides behind policy. Do you understand what you've done? Mitchell's voice cracked. Ms. Brooks, I swear I didn't mean... Don't. The word came out harder than Naomi intended. She took a breath, steadied herself. Don't insult me further by claiming you didn't mean what you clearly did. You saw a black woman in a modest dress asking for a substantial sum, and every assumption you made after that was filtered through bias so ingrained you don't even recognize it as bias. You saw threat instead of customer. You saw problem instead of person. The elderly woman who'd been in the waiting area stood up, her phone still in her hand. Her voice was stronger than her frail appearance suggested. I recorded some of it, not all, but enough. The way he spoke to you, the way his whole demeanor changed when you wouldn't back down. I've been banking here for 30 years, and I've never seen anyone treated the way he treated you. Catherine moved toward her. Ma'am, Would you be willing to provide that recording as evidence? Evidence for what? For ensuring this never happens again. The woman nodded firmly. Absolutely. James turned to the police officers who'd been standing witness to the entire exchange. Officers, I apologize for wasting your time. As you can see, there's no trespassing situation here. Just a profound failure of customer service and professional conduct. The female officer nodded slowly. Ma'am, I'm sorry for what you experienced. If you'd like to file a formal complaint about how this was handled, I'll handle it internally, Naomi said. But thank you. As the officers left, Naomi could see the male officer shaking his head, muttering something to his partner about the mess they'd almost stepped into. The lobby felt smaller now, the walls closer, the air thinner. Mitchell made one last desperate attempt. Ms. Brooks, please, I have a family. I've worked in banking for 15 years. This job is everything to me. If you just give me a chance to explain what? Naomi's exhaustion was showing now, the weight of the morning pressing down on shoulders that had carried too much for too long. Explain how you built a career on making people feel small. Explain how you trained your staff to see danger in diversity. What explanation makes this acceptable? I made a mistake. You made a choice. Multiple choices over an extended period that created a pattern clear enough to see from space. She turned to Catherine. Pull the records. I want every transaction over $5,000 from the past year, cross-referenced with customer demographics. I want to see exactly how widespread this problem is. Catherine was already typing. Done. I'll have preliminary analysis by end of business today. James addressed the branch staff, who were clustered together like survivors of a shipwreck. Everyone stays for the rest of the day. No one leaves until we've completed individual interviews. You'll each have a chance to explain your role in this branch's culture and your awareness of discriminatory practices. One of the tellers, an older white woman who'd been silent throughout, spoke up. Sir, some of us complained. I filed 3 reports with HR about concerns with Mr. Harrington's training methods. Catherine's fingers flew across her tablet. Name? Margaret Chen. I see your reports. They were marked as concerns addressed through additional training. Catherine's voice could have cut steel. Who marked them that way? Margaret's voice was bitter. Mr. Harrington's regional supervisor. Who else knew about these reports? 2 other tellers raised their hands slowly. The young man who'd first spoken up said, We talked about it in the break room. We knew something was wrong, but we thought, he's the manager. We figured he knew what he was doing, that maybe we were the ones who didn't understand proper protocol. Naomi recognized that particular poison. The assumption that authority equals correctness, that title equals truth. She'd spent years fighting it in boardrooms and branch offices, in meetings where her questions were dismissed until a male colleague repeated them and received applause for insight. Understanding protocol isn't the same as questioning bias, Naomi said to the young teller. But I appreciate that you're recognizing the difference now. James pulled Mitchell aside, his voice low but audible in the quiet lobby. You're suspended effective immediately, pending investigation. You'll surrender your keys, your access cards, and any bank property in your possession. Security will escort you to collect your personal items, and you'll be off premises within 20 minutes. Mitchell's last shred of composure shattered. Please, you can't do this. I'll lose everything. My reputation, my career. You already lost those things the moment you decided your prejudice was more important than your professionalism. I have rights. I'll fight this. I'll sue for wrongful termination. Catherine looked up from her tablet, her expression almost pitying. On what grounds? We have documented evidence of discriminatory behavior, multiple witness statements, video footage of your treatment of the CEO, and a pattern of complaints that were suppressed. Your contract includes termination clauses for conduct violations. You signed it. Please try to sue us. I'd love to present this case in court. The fight drained out of Mitchell like air from a punctured tire. He sagged, aged 10 years and 10 seconds, the reality of consequences finally penetrating the armor of his assumptions. Security, different guards than the one who'd been called to remove Naomi, arrived to escort him away. As he walked toward his office for the last time, he looked back at Naomi. She saw something in his face that might have been the beginning of understanding, the first crack in a foundation built on unexamined beliefs. Or maybe it was just fear. Maybe it was too soon to tell the difference. The elderly woman approached Naomi as the lobby began to empty of spectators. I want you to know something. I've been coming to this branch since it opened. I've watched good people come and go, seen management change hands 3 times. But I've never seen anyone stand their ground the way you did today. You could have revealed who you were immediately. You could have pulled rank and made him grovel, but you let him show exactly who he was first. Naomi managed a tired smile. I've learned that people's true character only shows when they think there are no consequences watching. Well, now he knows there are always consequences watching. The woman held up her phone. And recording, apparently. I'm Martha, by the way. Martha Weinstein. And for what it's worth, you have my complete support in whatever comes next. Thank you, Martha. As Martha left, Jessica approached hesitantly, her makeup ruined by tears, her hands trembling. Miss Brooks, I know I don't deserve to ask, but am I fired too? Naomi studied the young woman's face, seeing genuine distress alongside the fear. That depends. On what? On whether you learned something today, or whether you're just scared of getting caught. Jessica's breath hitched. I learned. I swear to you, I learned. I've been thinking about every interaction I've had since I started here. Every time I made assumptions about customers based on how they looked instead of who they were. I feel sick about it. I feel sick about myself. Good. The word was gentle despite its harshness. That feeling is called conscience. Don't lose it. Does that mean... It means you'll be interviewed like everyone else. It means your future here depends on your willingness to do better, not just feel bad. Naomi's voice softened slightly. But Jessica, understanding you were wrong is the first step toward doing right. Not everyone gets there. Some people spend their whole lives defending their biases instead of examining them. Jessica nodded, still crying, but with something like hope mixing with the shame. Thank you for not giving up on me. I haven't decided yet whether to give up on you or not. Show me I shouldn't. As Jessica returned to her station, Catherine pulled Naomi aside. The preliminary data is already concerning. Over the past year, customers of color requesting large cash withdrawals were flagged for additional verification at a rate 3 times higher than white customers requesting the same amounts. The pattern is unmistakable. And the regional supervisor who dismissed Margaret's complaints? Regional Vice President Todd Brennan. He oversees 6 branches in this area. Set up a meeting with him. Today. James interceded. Naomi, maybe you should take the rest of the day to what? Recover? Decompress? Pretend this didn't happen? Naomi's voice carried an edge now, the exhaustion transforming into something sharper. James, this isn't an isolated incident. This is systemic. And if Brennan knew about complaints and buried them, he's either complicit or incompetent. Either way, I want him in front of me today. Understood. Catherine was typing again. I'm also pulling employee satisfaction surveys, exit interview data, and customer complaint records across all branches in this region. If this pattern exists here, it likely exists elsewhere. Naomi walked to the window looking out at the gentrified street beyond. The coffee shops and boutiques, the clean sidewalks and fresh paint, all of it masking the same old patterns in new packaging. Progress wasn't geography. It wasn't architecture. It was people deciding to see other people as fully human, worthy of the same respect and benefit of the doubt they gave to those who looked like them. Margaret Chen approached quietly. Ms. Brooks, may I speak with you? Naomi turned. Of course. I want to thank you for doing what you did today, for not walking away when it would have been easier. I've worked in banking for 20 years, and I've seen this pattern in every branch I've been in. Different managers, same bias. I file complaints because I have to live with myself, but I stopped expecting anything to change. Margaret's voice cracked slightly. Today you made me think maybe something actually can change. Change requires more than one person standing up, Naomi said. It requires everyone standing together. Your reports mattered, Margaret. They created a paper trail that establishes this wasn't new behavior. They proved that good people tried to sound the alarm. A lot of good it did when no one listened. Someone's listening now. The branch remained open for the rest of the day, though few customers came in and fewer still stayed long when they sensed the tension. James set up a makeshift interview space in the conference room, speaking with each employee individually, while Catherine compiled data that painted a damning picture of casual discrimination disguised as careful banking. Around 3 in the afternoon, Todd Brennan arrived, a man in his 50s with silver hair and a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He entered the branch like he owned it, his confidence faltering only slightly when he saw Naomi standing in the lobby instead of the manager's office. "Ms. Brooks, I came as soon as I heard. I want to assure you that this incident is being taken extremely seriously." "Which incident?" Naomi asked. "The discrimination that happened this morning, or the complaints that were buried over the past 6 months?" Brennan's smile stiffened. "I think there may be some confusion about—" Margaret Chen filed 3 formal complaints about Mitchell Harrington's training methods and customer service practices. Those complaints detailed specific concerns about discriminatory behavior. You marked them as addressed through additional training without investigating the substance of the claims. Why? Mitchell assured me he'd corrected the issues raised. You took the word of the person being complained about instead of investigating the complaints? Ms. Brooks, with respect, I oversee 6 branches with 70 employees. I have to trust my managers to handle internal matters appropriately. Trust without verification isn't management. It's negligence. Brennan's jaw tightened. I resent the implication that I don't care what you resent. Naomi's voice was quiet but absolute. I care about the pattern your negligence enabled. I care about the customers who were treated with suspicion instead of service. I care about the employees who tried to do the right thing and were ignored because listening would have required you to do your actual job. The color rose in Brennan's face. I've been with this company for 18 years. My record speaks for itself. Yes, it does. Catherine stepped forward with her tablet. Your region has the highest rate of customer complaints about discriminatory service in the entire company. 17% of minority customers report feeling uncomfortable or unwelcome in branches under your supervision. Staff turnover among employees of color is 43% higher in your region than the company average, and you've dismissed or downgraded 68% of complaints that alleged bias or discrimination. Brennan opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Statistics can be interpreted multiple ways. True, Naomi said. So let's interpret them the generous way. Maybe you're not actively promoting discrimination. Maybe you're just spectacularly bad at recognizing it when it's happening directly under your supervision. Which interpretation would you prefer? The question hung between them like a sword. Brennan straightened his shoulders, trying to reclaim some authority. Ms. Brooks, I understand you're upset about this morning's events, but making me the scapegoat for one manager's poor judgment isn't going to solve anything. You're right. Scapegoating you won't solve anything. Naomi stepped closer. Holding you accountable for your role in creating the environment where Mitchell's poor judgment flourished unchecked might actually solve quite a bit. You're suspended pending investigation, same as he is. Catherine will coordinate with HR to ensure a thorough review of every decision you've made regarding discrimination complaints. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. This is outrageous. I'll fight this through every channel available. Please do. I welcome the scrutiny. Naomi's expression was ice now, every ounce of exhaustion transformed into diamond-hard resolve. Because when we're done investigating, the entire company will know exactly what kind of culture you built and what kind of leader you failed to be. Brennan left the branch escorted by security, his outrage carrying him through the door, but unlikely to sustain him through what was coming. Naomi watched him go and felt the weight of the day settling into her bones. James came to stand beside her. You should go home. We can handle the rest. I'm not finished yet. Naomi, I came here to withdraw $20,000. I'm not leaving until I do. The remaining staff had gathered near their stations, watching. Jessica stepped forward slowly. Ms. Brooks, I can process that transaction for you now, if you still trust me to. Naomi looked at the young woman who'd been part of her humiliation hours earlier. She saw fear there still, but also something harder to fake, genuine remorse and the fragile hope of redemption. Yes, Naomi said, I'd appreciate that. The transaction took 4 minutes. Jessica's hands shook slightly as she counted the bills, double-checked the amount. prepared the withdrawal slip for signature. When she handed the envelope of cash across the counter, her voice was barely audible. "I'm sorry for everything. I know that doesn't fix what happened, but I need you to know I'm sorry." Naomi took the envelope, the money she'd been trying to access for hours, the simple transaction that had revealed so much ugliness. "Apologies are cheap without change, Jessica. Show me change." "I will. I promise you I will." As Naomi turned to leave, Margaret called out, "Ms. Brooks, what happens now?" Naomi paused in the doorway, looking back at the branch that would never be the same, at the employees who'd witnessed the cost of complicity and the price of courage. "Now we rebuild. Better systems, better training, better accountability. And we make sure that the next person who walks through that door gets treated with the dignity and respect they deserve, regardless of what they look like or what assumptions anyone wants to make." The late afternoon sun slanted through the glass walls, painting everything in amber light that made the marble floors look almost warm. Naomi stepped out onto the street where her morning had started, where she'd been just another customer seeking routine service. Her phone buzzed, a message from James. "Meeting with executive leadership scheduled for tomorrow morning. They want to discuss immediate reforms." She replied, "Good. We have a lot to discuss." Another message, this one from an unknown number. "This is Martha Weinstein. I shared the video with my daughter. She's a civil rights attorney. She says what you did today matters. She says you showed people what accountability looks like. I thought you should know." Naomi stood on the corner holding her phone, feeling the envelope of cash in her purse that represented so much more than money. She thought about the words she'd heard, the looks she'd endured, the assumptions that had been made before she'd even spoken. She thought about Jessica's tears and Margaret's persistence and Mitchell's fall and Brennan's arrogance. Most of all, she thought about all the people who'd walked into branches like this one and walked out diminished, who didn't have the power to call executives or the authority to demand change, who just had to absorb the humiliation and move on because survival meant swallowing dignity. This morning, she'd been one of them. This evening, she was still one of them, just with more tools to fight back. Her driver pulled up, finally called now that the crisis had passed. As she slid into the back seat, she felt the exhaustion truly hit, the adrenaline draining away and leaving only the heavy knowledge of battles won and wars still to fight. "Where to, Ms. Brooks?" She looked back at the bank branch one more time, at the building that looked so clean and modern and progressive from the outside, at the glass walls that revealed nothing about what happened within. "Home," she said. "But tomorrow we change everything." The car pulled away from the curb, but the building stayed with her, reflected in the window glass like a ghost she couldn't shake. Naomi closed her eyes and let her head rest against the seat, feeling every hour of the day in her muscles, her jaw, the tight space behind her eyes where a headache was building. Her phone buzzed again. Then again. The messages were piling up now that word had spread through the executive network. She ignored them all except one from her husband. "Saw the news. Are you okay?" She stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. "Define okay." The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "Home in 20. I'm cooking." Something in her chest loosened slightly. Marcus understood the kind of tired that went deeper than physical exhaustion, the weight that settled in when you were forced to fight battles you shouldn't have to fight just to access basic human dignity. He'd grown up black in America too. He knew. The drive home took her through neighborhoods that shifted and changed like layers of sediment, each one telling a story about who belonged and who didn't, who was welcome and who was watched. She'd lived in this city her entire adult life, climbed from a teller position counting other people's money to the corner office where she controlled billions. The address on her driver's license had changed, the numbers in her bank account had multiplied, but certain things remained stubbornly constant. By the time she walked through her front door, the smell of garlic and tomatoes greeted her before Marcus did. He appeared from the kitchen, reading her face the way 23 years of marriage had taught him to, and simply opened his arms. She walked into them and stayed there, not crying, just existing in a space where she didn't have to explain or justify or prove anything. "Bad day?" he asked after a while, his voice rumbling in his chest under her ear. "Educational day. Want to talk about it?" After wine. He kissed the top of her head. "Already breathing." Dinner was pasta with sauce he'd made from scratch, comfort food that required no thought to eat and no conversation to enjoy. They ate in the kind of silence that only worked when two people genuinely liked each other's company. Afterward, on the couch with glasses of red wine that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget, Naomi finally told him everything. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression cycling through anger, resignation, and a weary recognition that made her heart hurt. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You could have told them who you were right away," he finally said. "I could have. But you wanted to see how far they'd take it." "I needed to see. Because if I'd pulled rank immediately, Mitchell would have scrambled to cover himself. He would have been deferential and apologetic, and I would never have known how he truly operates when he thinks there are no consequences." Marcus nodded slowly. "And now you know." "Now I know, and so does everyone else. The board is going to lose their minds tomorrow." Naomi took a long sip of wine. "The board is going to sit quietly and listen while I explain exactly what kind of liability we've been carrying in our customer service practices. And then they're going to approve every reform I propose because the alternative is watching this story go public in ways we can't control." "Martha's video?" "Martha's video is probably already on social media. By tomorrow morning, it'll be on news sites. By tomorrow afternoon, we'll be answering questions from regulators and civil rights organizations." Naomi set down her glass. "Which is fine. Better than fine. Because sunlight is the best disinfectant, and this infection has been spreading in the dark for too long." Marcus studied her face. "You're not just fixing one branch." "I can't fix just one branch. If it's happening at Riverside, it's happening elsewhere. The data Catherine pulled already shows patterns across Brennan's entire region. I'd bet my salary the patterns exist company-wide." "So you're going to war." "I'm going to do my job, which includes ensuring that our customers are treated with respect regardless of their race, their clothes, or their account balance." She met his eyes. "You know what the worst part is? It's not that Mitchell is a bigot. It's that he probably doesn't think he is. He probably tells himself he's just being thorough, just following his instincts, just protecting the bank's interests. He's wrapped his prejudice in such thick layers of self-justification that he can't even see it anymore." "And the employees who complained?" "Margaret and the others did exactly what they should have done. They saw wrong and reported it. And the system failed them because the person reviewing their complaints was more interested in protecting his manager than protecting the company's values." Naomi's voice hardened. "That stops now." Her phone lit up with another message, this one from Catherine. "Preliminary analysis complete. You need to see this before tomorrow's meeting." Naomi opened the attached file and felt her stomach drop. The data was worse than she'd expected. Across Brennan's 6 branches, the pattern was undeniable. Customers of color waited longer for service, were questioned more thoroughly about transaction purposes, had their identification scrutinized more closely, and were denied services at significantly higher rates than white customers with identical financial profiles. The numbers were stark, irrefutable, damning. She handed the phone to Marcus. He scrolled through the spreadsheet, his jaw tightening with each page. How did no one catch this before? Because no one was looking, or because the people who should have been looking benefited from not seeing? Naomi took the phone back. Every metric we track focuses on profitability, efficiency, customer retention. We measure what we value, and apparently we haven't valued equity enough to measure it. Until now. Until now. They sat together in silence, the weight of what was coming settling over them like snow. Finally, Marcus said, "You know there's going to be backlash. From employees who think you're overreacting, from customers who claim you're being too politically correct, from shareholders who worry about the cost of reforms. Let them complain. Let them be uncomfortable. Maybe discomfort is exactly what's needed." Naomi leaned into him. "I spent this morning being treated like a criminal for trying to access my own money. How many other people experience that every day and can't do anything about it? How many just accept it as the price of existing while black in America?" "Too many." "Too many," she echoed, "and I'm done accepting it." The next morning arrived too quickly and with too much noise. Her inbox was flooded with messages from board members, executives, regional managers, all of them wanting to discuss strategy, control the narrative, manage the situation. The video Martha had taken was indeed circulating online, already viewed hundreds of thousands of times, shared with commentary ranging from supportive outrage to accusations that it was staged. Naomi ignored all of it until she was showered, dressed, and caffeinated enough to face the firing squad that would be her executive leadership meeting. She chose her outfit carefully. The same navy dress from yesterday, the same comfortable flats. Let them see exactly what Mitchell had seen, exactly what he'd judged. James met her in the parking garage, his expression grim. The board is already assembled. They've been here since 7. Nervous? Terrified. Richard Caldwell has been making calls all morning. He's not happy about the suspensions. Richard Caldwell was the board chairman, a man in his 70s who'd made his fortune in commercial real estate and treated the bank like a hobby that should make money without requiring too much attention. Naomi had clashed with him before on issues of diversity and inclusion, conversations where he'd smile and nod and ultimately do nothing. Richard is never happy when accountability interferes with comfort, Naomi said. How he feels about it is irrelevant. They rode the elevator in silence. When the doors opened on the executive floor, she could feel the tension before she could see it. Assistants looked up from their desks with expressions that ranged from sympathy to concern to poorly disguised curiosity. The boardroom door was closed, but she could hear voices inside, sharp and contentious. James reached for the handle. Naomi stopped him. "Before we go in, I need to know where you stand." "I stand with you, always have." "Even if it costs you friendships on the board? Even if Caldwell makes it difficult?" James met her eyes. "Naomi, I've watched you build this company into something better than it was. I've seen you fight for people who had no voice and push for changes others said were impossible. If you're going to war over this, I'm standing beside you, not behind you." She squeezed his arm once, grateful. Then she opened the door. The conversation stopped instantly. 12 faces turned toward her, 12 expressions varying from supportive to skeptical to openly hostile. Richard Caldwell sat at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit probably worth more than Jessica made in a month. He didn't stand when Naomi entered. "Ms. Brooks, thank you for joining us." The formality was a warning shot. On good days, he called her Naomi. "Richard, board members, thank you for gathering on short notice." She moved to her seat at the opposite end of the table, standing rather than sitting. "I assume you've all seen the video by now." "We've seen it." Caldwell's voice was ice wrapped in silk. "We've also fielded calls from 3 major shareholders, 2 news organizations, and the NAACP. Would you care to explain how this public relations disaster was allowed to happen?" "I'd be happy to explain how systemic discrimination was allowed to flourish in our branches while leadership looked the other way," Naomi replied evenly. "As for the public relations aspect, the disaster isn't the video, it's what the video documented." A woman near the middle of the table, Patricia Morrison, cleared her throat. "Naomi, no one is defending what happened to you, but suspending 2 employees and launching a company-wide investigation the same day seems reactive. Wouldn't it have been wiser to handle this more quietly?" "Handle discrimination quietly?" Naomi let the question hang. "Patricia, with respect, quiet handling is how we got here. Complaints were filed quietly. They were dismissed quietly. Patterns developed quietly. And while we were being quiet, our customers were being subjected to treatment that violates every value we claim to hold." "One incident," Caldwell started. "Isn't one incident." Catherine entered the room, tablet in hand, moving with the confidence of someone who knew her data was irrefutable. "May I present the findings?" Caldwell looked like he wanted to refuse, but too many other board members were nodding, and he couldn't stop her without revealing exactly what kind of information he was afraid to see. Catherine connected her tablet to the main screen and pulled up the first slide. The numbers painted a story that was impossible to misinterpret. Wait times for services, broken down by customer demographics. Approval rates for loans and credit increases. Frequency of identity verification requests. Rates of service denial. Every metric showed the same pattern, stark and undeniable. The room was silent except for the hum of the projector. Catherine let the data speak for itself. advancing through slides that documented 3 years of discriminatory practices across 17 branches in 4 regions. "These patterns exist," Catherine said quietly, "because we allowed them to exist. Because we measured profit but not equity. Because we trained employees to be efficient but not to be fair. Because complaints were treated as public relations problems instead of serious allegations requiring investigation." Board member Thomas Wright, a black man who'd fought his way onto the board 5 years ago, spoke up. "How many complaints were filed in total?" Over the 3-year period analyzed, 247 complaints alleged discriminatory treatment. 41 were substantiated and resulted in employee discipline. 73 were marked as resolved through additional training. 133 were dismissed as unfounded or unsubstantiated. "Who decided they were unfounded?" Thomas asked. "Regional managers reviewing complaints about their own staff." The implications of that settled over the room like toxic fog. Caldwell shifted in his seat. "Catherine, are you suggesting that our regional management has been deliberately covering up discrimination?" "I'm suggesting that asking people to investigate themselves creates an obvious conflict of interest. I'm suggesting that when complaints are consistently dismissed without external review, patterns get missed. I'm suggesting that we failed in our duty of care to both our customers and our employees." Patricia leaned forward. "What's the proposed solution?" Naomi stepped in. "Complete restructuring of our complaint review process, mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff, demographic tracking of all major transactions, third-party audits of branch practices, and immediate implementation of equity metrics in management performance reviews." "That's going to be expensive," another board member noted. "Lawsuits are more expensive. Lost customers are more expensive. A destroyed reputation is more expensive." Naomi's voice didn't rise, didn't need to. "But beyond the financial calculation, it's the right thing to do. We can't claim to serve our communities while systematically discriminating against members of those communities." Caldwell finally stood, his height and position at the table meant to assert dominance. "Ms. Brooks, I understand you had a difficult experience yesterday, but let's not let emotion override sound business judgment. Suspending employees, launching investigations, implementing sweeping reforms, these are significant actions that could have serious consequences for morale, efficiency, and our bottom line." "Do you know what has serious consequences for our bottom line?" Naomi matched his stance, her voice cutting across the distance between them. "Viral videos showing our branch managers calling security to remove customers for requesting their own money. Social media campaigns calling for boycotts. Regulatory investigations into discriminatory lending practices. Civil rights lawsuits seeking damages and systemic reform. Those things destroy companies, Richard. What I'm proposing saves us." "By turning us into a testing ground for progressive ideology?" The words hung in the air like a slap. Several board members looked uncomfortable. Thomas's expression went cold. James closed his eyes briefly. Naomi spoke very quietly. "Treating customers with equal dignity isn't progressive ideology. It's basic human decency and sound business practice. If you can't see the difference, that's deeply concerning." "I won't be lectured about." "Yes, you will." The words came out harder than Naomi intended, but she didn't soften them. "You'll be lectured, and you'll listen, because what happened yesterday happened on your watch. The board approved the budgets that funded branches. The board hired the executives who hired the regional managers who ignored the complaints. The board set the priorities that valued profit over people. You don't get to distance yourself from this." Caldwell's face flushed. "I've been on this board for 12 years. And in those 12 years, how many times did you ask about demographic equity in our services? How many times did you question whether our growth was built on fair access? How many complaints did you personally review?" Naomi paused. "I can answer that last one. 0. Not a single complaint about discrimination crossed your desk in 12 years because you made it clear you didn't want to see them. That's not fair." "Fair?" Naomi's laugh was sharp. "You want to talk about fair? Mitchell Harrington thought it was fair to question my right to access my account while waving through white customers with larger withdrawals. Todd Brennan thought it was fair to dismiss Margaret Chen's complaints because listening would have been inconvenient. You think it's fair to prioritize your comfort over systemic reform. Meanwhile, customers are being denied services. Employees are being forced to choose between their jobs and their conscience, and our company is violating the civil rights of the people we're supposed to serve." The silence that followed was absolute. Patricia looked at her hands. Thomas was nodding slowly. James stood against the wall, arms crossed, expression carefully neutral. Caldwell sat down heavily. When he spoke again, some of the bluster had drained from his voice. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Full implementation of the equity program Catherine developed, third-party oversight of complaint investigations, demographic tracking of all services, mandatory training on bias recognition, and immediate termination of Mitchell Harrington and Todd Brennan pending legal review." "You want to fire them without completing the investigation?" "I want to terminate their employment for documented violations of company policy and basic professional standards. The investigation will determine whether there are grounds for legal action, but their employment status is decided. They're done." Another board member, Stephen Park, spoke carefully. "Naomi, terminations of this magnitude require board approval." "Then approve them." "We need time to review the evidence. Consult with legal. The evidence is on that screen. Legal has already confirmed we have grounds. What you need time for is finding a way to avoid making a decision you're afraid might be controversial." Naomi leaned forward, palms flat on the table. "But here's what I need you to understand. This story is already out there. The video has been viewed over 1 million times. News outlets are calling. Regulatory agencies are asking questions. We can be the company that takes immediate, decisive action to correct discriminatory practices, or we can be the company that dragged its feet while trying to protect employees who violated customer rights. Choose carefully, because that choice will define us." Patricia broke the silence. "I move that we approve Ms. Brooks' recommendations in full, including the immediate terminations." "Second," Thomas said immediately. Caldwell looked around the table, seeing the tide turning against him. "All in favor?" 9 hands went up. 2 remained down, including Caldwell's own. 1 abstention. "Motion carries," Caldwell's voice was flat. "Ms. Brooks, you have your approval. I hope you're prepared for the consequences." "I'm prepared for the work," Naomi replied. "The consequences I'll handle as they come." The meeting continued for another hour, discussing implementation details, budget allocations, communication strategies. Naomi answered questions, addressed concerns, pushed back against attempts to water down reforms. By the time it ended, she felt wrung out, but grimly satisfied. As the board members filed out, Thomas hung back. That took courage. That took exhaustion with the alternative. Caldwell is going to make things difficult for you. Caldwell has been making things difficult for me since the day I was appointed CEO. This is just more obvious than usual. Naomi gathered her materials. "Thank you for your support." "Don't thank me. I'm just tired of being the only voice in the room pointing out patterns everyone else claims not to see." He paused. "My daughter wants to be a banker. She's finishing her MBA this year. I want her to walk into branches and be treated like she belongs there, not like she's a problem to be managed. Then help me make sure that's the company she inherits." After he left, James approached. "You made an enemy today." "I made an enemy the day I refused to be quiet and compliant. Today, I just made it official." "He'll try to undermine the reforms." "Let him try. The data doesn't lie, the video doesn't lie, and the board voted. He can be uncomfortable all he wants." Naomi met James's concerned gaze. "I know what I'm risking. I know this could cost me my job if Caldwell convinces enough board members I'm too controversial. But James, I can't keep my job by pretending yesterday didn't happen. I can't lead this company by accepting that some customers matter more than others." "I know. That's why I stand with you." The rest of the day blurred into conference calls, strategy sessions, and carefully worded press releases. The communications team wanted to minimize the situation. Naomi insisted on transparency. Legal wanted to avoid admissions of wrongdoing. Naomi insisted on accountability. By evening, the statement they released acknowledged systemic failures, announced immediate reforms, and committed to ongoing transparency about progress. The response was immediate and divided. Customers who'd experienced discrimination shared their stories. Employees who'd witnessed problems came forward, but others pushed back, claiming the company was overreacting, giving in to pressure, abandoning standards in favor of politics. Naomi read it all, the praise and the vitriol, the support and the accusations. And through it all, she kept coming back to one moment from the morning, standing in that lobby while Mitchell called security, feeling the eyes of everyone watching, wondering if she'd done something wrong simply by existing while black in a space that didn't expect her. Her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Ms. Brooks, this is Margaret Chen from the Riverside branch. Margaret, how are you holding up? I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. I wanted to call and tell you something. Margaret's voice was stronger than it had been the day before. After you left, after everything happened, we had a staff meeting. Everyone who stayed. And we talked, really talked about what we'd seen and what we'd been part of. Jessica cried for an hour. The other tellers admitted they'd known something was wrong but didn't know how to stop it. And we made a commitment, all of us, to do better. That's good to hear. It's more than good. It's necessary. Because I realized yesterday that I've been complicit too, in my own way. I filed reports, yes, but I still process transactions the way I was trained. I still let bias guide my instincts sometimes. I still looked the other way when it would have been uncomfortable to look directly at problems. Margaret paused. You showing up changed something, not just in the bank, but in us. You made us see ourselves clearly, and it wasn't comfortable, but it was real. Naomi felt tears threatening for the first time since the whole ordeal began. Thank you for telling me that. Thank you for not giving up on us, for believing we could do better even after you saw us at our worst. After the call ended, Naomi sat in her office as the sun set over the city, turning the glass towers gold and then amber and then gray. She thought about Margaret and Jessica, about Thomas's daughter and Martha's video, about every person who'd ever walked into a bank and been made to feel less than, other than, not quite right. Tomorrow there would be more fights, more resistance, more people insisting that change was unnecessary, or too expensive, or politically motivated. Tomorrow she'd face shareholders who cared more about quarterly profits than quarterly progress toward justice. But tonight, in this moment, she allowed herself to feel something that wasn't quite hope, but was close enough to keep her moving forward. The system had shown its flaws. The response had begun. And somewhere, in branches across the company, employees were having conversations they'd never had before, seeing clearly what they'd been trained to overlook. It wasn't victory yet, but it was movement. And movement, Naomi had learned over decades of fighting battles others said couldn't be won, was how impossible things became inevitable. She closed her laptop, gathered her things, and headed home to Marcus and to rest, because tomorrow the real work would begin. The real work began at dawn 3 days later, when Naomi stood in front of 240 employees from 17 branches, all of them summoned to the Regional Training Center for what the official memo called mandatory equity and inclusion training, and what the whispered conversations called damage control after the CEO got embarrassed. She could feel the tension in the room before she said a word. Some faces showed genuine engagement, people like Margaret who'd been waiting for this moment. Others radiated defensiveness, arms crossed, expressions closed, already convinced this was political theater that would pass like every other corporate initiative. A few looked scared, wondering if they'd be the next ones terminated for behavior they'd thought was normal. Catherine stood to her left, tablet ready with data that would answer every objection. James sat in the front row, visible support for anyone watching. And in the back corner, almost hidden, sat Jessica from the Riverside branch, her face pale but determined. Naomi didn't use the podium. She walked to the center of the floor and stood there, making eye contact with as many people as she could reach. When she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that people had to lean forward to hear. 3 days ago, I walked into the Riverside branch to withdraw $20,000 from my account. I was denied service, questioned about my intentions, treated with suspicion, and ultimately had security called to remove me. All because the branch manager looked at me and saw a threat instead of a customer. The room was absolutely silent. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at the floor. I want to be very clear about something. What happened to me wasn't unique. It wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a disease that's been spreading through this company for years while we convinced ourselves we were immune. Naomi paused, letting the words settle. The only thing that made my experience different was that I had the power to do something about it. Most of our customers don't have that power. They just have to accept being treated as less than, other than, not quite trustworthy enough. A hand went up in the middle section, a man in his 30s with a regional manager badge. Naomi nodded to him. Ms. Brooks, with respect, aren't you painting with a pretty broad brush? Most of us work hard to serve all our customers equally. One manager's mistakes don't represent the entire company. You're right that one manager's mistakes don't represent everyone, but one manager's mistakes that were reported, documented, and ignored by his supervisor start to represent a systemic problem. When that pattern appears across multiple branches, multiple regions, it stops being about individuals and starts being about culture. Naomi moved closer to him. What's your name? Derek Williamson. I manage the Northgate branch. Derek, in the past 6 months, how many customers at your branch filed complaints about discriminatory service? He hesitated. I'd have to check the records. Catherine didn't have to check anything. 4 complaints, Mr. Williamson. 2 dismissed as unsubstantiated. 1 resolved through staff counseling. 1 still pending review. And did you personally investigate any of those complaints? Naomi asked. I spoke with the staff members involved, yes. Did you speak with the customers who complained? Derek's jaw tightened. I read their written statements. That's not what I asked. No, I didn't speak directly with the customers. Why not? Because the staff members assured me there was no discriminatory intent. They were just following protocol. Protocol, Naomi repeated the word Mitchell had used. Derek, can you tell me what percentage of your customers are people of color? I don't know the exact percentage. Catherine supplied it. 37% of Northgate's customer base identifies as non-white, but 49% of customers flagged for additional identity verification are people of color. 62% of loan applications from minority customers require additional documentation compared to 41% from white customers with similar financial profiles. Derek's face flushed. Those numbers could reflect differences in account history, transaction patterns. They could, Naomi agreed, or they could reflect exactly what the customers who complained told you they reflected. Bias. The question is why you chose to believe your staff's assurances over your customers' experiences. I didn't want to accuse my employees of something serious without proof. But you were comfortable dismissing your customers' allegations without investigation. Naomi let that sit for a moment. Do you see the problem? You gave benefit of the doubt to the people who looked like you, worked with you, shared your professional identity. The customers who were different, who were outsiders to your daily experience, they had to prove their case beyond reasonable doubt. That's not equity, Derek. That's exactly how systemic discrimination maintains itself. Another hand shot up, this one from a younger woman near the front. Ms. Brooks, I'm Kendra Williams from the East Side branch. I'm Black, and I've worked for this company for 3 years. I've experienced some of what you're describing, both as an employee and in how I see customers treated. But I've also filed reports that went nowhere. How do we know this time will be different? The question held real pain, real doubt born from real disappointment. Naomi recognized the weight of it. Kendra, I can't promise you this time will be different. What I can promise is that I'm willing to stake my career on making it different. The reforms we're implementing aren't suggestions or guidelines. They're requirements with consequences. Demographic tracking becomes part of every branch's performance review. Complaint investigations will be conducted by third-party reviewers, not regional managers investigating themselves. Equity metrics will impact bonuses and promotions. And most importantly, employees who report discriminatory practices will be protected, not punished. And if regional managers retaliate anyway, Kendra's voice was sharp with the knowledge that policies and reality often diverged. Then they'll be terminated. Same as Mitchell Harrington. Same as Todd Brennan. Naomi met Kendra's eyes directly. I know you've heard promises before. I know words are cheap without action, so watch what happens over the next 6 months. Hold me accountable. Hold this company accountable. And if we fail to deliver, call me directly. She pulled out a business card and walked it over to Kendra. My personal cell number is on the back. Use it. The gesture rippled through the room. Several people sat up straighter. A few pulled out phones to take notes. The atmosphere shifted from defensive to cautiously engaged. Jessica stood up in the back, her voice shaking but audible. Ms. Brooks, I was the teller who initially served you at Riverside. I did everything wrong. I made assumptions. I questioned your legitimacy. I participated in your humiliation. Tears were streaming down her face now. I thought I was just being careful. I thought I was doing my job, but really, I was doing exactly what you just described. I gave benefit of the doubt to people who looked like me, and skepticism to people who didn't. The room held its breath. Naomi walked toward Jessica slowly. What changed? Naomi asked quietly. You did. Or rather, seeing myself through your eyes changed me. When you asked me if I'd learned something or if I was just scared of getting caught, it broke something open. I realized I've been operating on autopilot, following patterns I didn't even recognize as patterns, treating people differently without even realizing I was doing it. Jessica wiped her eyes. I don't know if I deserve to keep this job, but if you let me stay, I promise I'll spend every day trying to do better. Learning you were wrong is painful, Naomi said. Staying wrong because learning is uncomfortable is inexcusable. The fact that you're standing here, publicly acknowledging your role, telling the truth even when it's hard, that matters, Jessica. But does it matter enough? That depends on what you do next. Words are easy. Change is hard. Show me the hard work. As Jessica sat down, a man near the back called out without raising his hand. This all sounds great for public relations, but what about the reality of running a branch? We're judged on efficiency, on preventing fraud, on managing risk. Sometimes that means making quick judgments about whether a transaction seems legitimate. What's your name? Naomi asked. Paul Henderson. 22 years in banking, currently branch manager at Westfield. Paul, tell me something. When you make those quick judgments about transaction legitimacy, what factors do you consider? Account history, transaction size, customer behavior, consistency with past patterns. An appearance, the way someone dresses, speaks, looks. Paul hesitated just long enough to reveal the truth. Sometimes those factors can indicate, what? What do those factors indicate beyond your own assumptions about what wealth or legitimacy looks like? Naomi's voice sharpened. I was wearing a department store dress and carrying a 4-year-old handbag. Based on appearance, what would you have assumed about me? Paul didn't answer. That's what I thought. Paul, the problem isn't that you're trying to prevent fraud or manage risk. The problem is that you're using shortcuts that rely on stereotypes instead of actual risk indicators. A person's clothes don't tell you about their account balance. Their accent doesn't tell you about their transaction legitimacy. Their race doesn't tell you anything except their race. So we're supposed to ignore our instincts? You're supposed to train better instincts. Instincts based on behavior and data, not on bias and assumption. Naomi gestured to Catherine. Show them the comparison. Catherine pulled up 2 side-by-side scenarios on the main screen. Both involved customers requesting $15,000 in cash. Both had similar account histories, similar transaction patterns, similar financial profiles. The only difference was the demographic information attached to each file. These are real transactions from the past month, Catherine explained. The customer on the left was processed in 6 minutes with standard verification. The customer on the right was held for 23 minutes while the branch manager was consulted, additional identification was requested, and questions were asked about the purpose of the withdrawal. What was the difference in outcome? Naomi asked. Did the extended verification on the right catch fraud? No. Both transactions were legitimate. Both customers were long-standing account holders. Both had excellent credit. The only difference was that the customer on the right was black and the customer on the left was white. The numbers on the screen told a story that words couldn't hide from. Paul's face went through several expressions before settling on something close to shame. A woman in her 50s raised her hand tentatively. I'm Sharon Martinez, and I've been a teller for 18 years. I want to do better, I really do, but I'm scared of making mistakes. What if I process a transaction that I should have questioned? What if I fail to catch fraud because I was trying too hard not to be biased? Naomi softened her tone. Sharon, that's a valid concern. But here's what I need you to understand. The protocols for fraud prevention are based on specific risk factors. Account age, transaction patterns, sudden changes in behavior, attempts to bypass security measures. Those are legitimate red flags. A customer's race, clothes, or accent are not risk factors. They're just characteristics that trigger your brain's pattern recognition, and if those patterns were built on biased assumptions, They'll lead you to biased conclusions. So how do we retrain our pattern recognition? By being intentional, by questioning your first assumptions, by asking yourself why you're flagging something as suspicious and whether those same factors would raise concerns if the customer looked different. Naomi moved to the center of the room again. And by having support systems that help you make those distinctions. The new protocols we're implementing include decision trees for transaction verification. Clear, objective criteria that apply equally to everyone. No more relying on gut feelings that are really just disguised bias. An older man stood up, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Ms. Brooks, I'm Gerald Foster, Regional Vice President for the Northern District. I appreciate what you're trying to do here, but I'm concerned about the practical implications. The kind of oversight you're describing is going to slow down operations, increase costs, create administrative burden. In a competitive banking environment, efficiency matters. Naomi turned to face him fully. Gerald, let me ask you something. How much do you think defending a class action discrimination lawsuit would cost? He blinked. Millions. Tens of millions when you factor in settlements, legal fees, reputation damage, and lost customers. And that's assuming we win, which given the data Catherine has compiled, we wouldn't. Naomi stepped closer. The administrative burden of tracking equity metrics and conducting fair complaint investigations is a rounding error compared to the cost of continuing business as usual. But more than that, it's the right thing to do. And if you can't see past the balance sheet to the human beings we're supposed to serve, maybe you're in the wrong line of work. Gerald's face reddened. That's insulting and unprofessional. What's unprofessional is treating customers like criminals because they don't match your mental image of what a valued client looks like. What's insulting is dismissing legitimate complaints because investigating them would be inconvenient. Naomi's voice didn't rise, but it cut through the room like a blade. Gerald, I've seen the complaint records from your district. 17 allegations of discriminatory service in the past year. You personally reviewed and dismissed 12 of them without conducting interviews or examining transaction data. Want to explain your process? I used my judgment based on years of experience. Your judgment protected employees who violated customer rights. Your experience apparently taught you that image management matters more than justice. And your years in this industry have apparently insulated you from recognizing when the old ways are actually just the wrong ways with seniority. The room was dead silent. Gerald stood there, face flushed, clearly struggling between outrage and the dawning realization that challenging the CEO publicly was career suicide. James stood up from the front row. Perhaps we should take a 15-minute break. Naomi shook her head. We're not taking a break. We're going to sit with this discomfort because discomfort is where learning happens. Everyone in this room who's feeling defensive, angry, or attacked right now, that feeling is important. It's telling you that something you believed about yourself is being challenged. You thought you were fair. You thought you were professional. You thought you were just doing your job. And now you're being told that your fairness had blind spots, your professionalism had biases, and your job was built on assumptions you never questioned. She looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. That's hard to hear. I know it's hard, but you know what's harder? Being the customer who gets denied service. Being the employee who reports problems and gets ignored. Being the person who walks through our doors and immediately gets judged, questioned, and treated as less than. Your discomfort right now is temporary. Their experience is constant. Kendra stood up again. Ms. Brooks, what happens to those of us who've been on both sides? I'm a Black woman working in a predominantly white branch. I've experienced discrimination from customers who don't think I'm qualified to handle their accounts. But I've also caught myself making assumptions about other minority customers, especially those who are from different communities than mine. How do we talk about that complexity? By talking about it exactly the way you just did, with honesty. Naomi gestured for Kendra to stay standing. Bias isn't something only white people have. We all carry assumptions based on our experiences, our culture, our fears. The difference is whether we let those assumptions drive our behavior unchecked or whether we examine them critically. But doesn't that mean we're all problematic? Another voice called out. It means we're all human. We all have biases. The question is what we do about them. Naomi paused, choosing her next words carefully. I've been in banking for 26 years. I've worked my way from teller to CEO, and I still catch myself making assumptions based on incomplete information. The difference is that I've trained myself to notice those moments and question whether my assumptions are based on facts or on patterns I've absorbed from a society that has very specific ideas about who belongs where and who deserves what. Sharon raised her hand again. Can you give us an example? Something specific we can watch for? Naomi thought back to her own recent experiences. 2 months ago, I was in a meeting with potential investors. Young guy, maybe 25, wearing jeans and a hoodie. My first instinct was to assume he was someone's assistant who'd wandered into the wrong room. Turns out he was the founder of a tech startup worth $200 million. My assumption was based on age and appearance, and it was wrong. Now, I didn't act on that assumption, didn't treat him poorly, but I noticed it, and I corrected it internally before it could influence my behavior. What if you don't notice it? Someone asked. Then you create systems that catch what you miss. That's why we're implementing the new protocols, decision trees that force you to articulate why you're flagging something, demographic tracking that reveals patterns you might not see individually, third-party review that provides outside perspective. We're building scaffolding to support better decision-making because we can't rely on everyone's internal awareness being perfect. The questions continued, some genuine and searching, others defensive and challenging. Naomi answered them all, pushing back when necessary, acknowledging complexity when appropriate, refusing to let discomfort derail the conversation. 3 hours into the session, a young man in the back stood up. Ms. Brooks, I'm Marcus Thompson. No relation, he added with a slight smile that got a few chuckles. I'm a new teller, only been here 4 months, and honestly, I'm terrified. I'm 23, I'm black. I grew up in neighborhoods where people looked at me like I was a threat just for existing. I took this job because I wanted to be on the other side of that, wanted to be someone people trusted. But now I'm realizing I might have brought some of those defense mechanisms with me. I might be overcorrecting, being extra careful with minority customers because I don't want anyone to think I'm giving preferential treatment, and I don't know how to navigate that. The honesty in his voice shifted something in the room. Several people nodded. Kendra's expression showed recognition. Marcus, what you're describing is real and it's complicated, Naomi said. You're navigating an environment where you're hyper-aware of how your actions will be interpreted, where you're trying to prove yourself worthy while also being authentic to who you are. That's exhausting. It is, Marcus agreed quietly. Here's what I want you to know. The goal isn't to pretend you don't see race or that you don't have experiences that shape your perspective. The goal is to serve every customer with the same respect and professionalism, regardless of whether they remind you of yourself or your family or your community. You can acknowledge your own background and still treat each person as an individual with unique circumstances. But how do I know I'm getting it right? You won't always. None of us will. But you'll get better with practice, with feedback, with reflection. And when you mess up, when, not if, what matters is how you respond. Do you defend your mistakes, or do you learn from them? Do you blame the customer for being sensitive, or do you examine your behavior? Do you shut down, or do you grow? As the session wound toward its end, Naomi felt the exhaustion of emotional labor settling into her bones. This was the work that didn't make headlines, that didn't show up in quarterly earnings reports, that couldn't be captured in a viral video. This was the slow, grinding, necessary work of changing hearts and minds, one conversation at a time. Catherine stepped forward to outline the implementation timeline. Third-party auditors would begin reviewing branches next week. New training protocols would roll out over the next month. Demographic tracking would be implemented immediately. Complaint investigation procedures were already in effect. And one more thing, Catherine added. We're establishing an equity council made up of employees from all levels of the organization. This council will have direct access to executive leadership and will review policies, practices, and progress toward our equity goals. If you're interested in serving, applications will be available starting tomorrow. Kendra's hand shot up immediately. So did Marcus's. Several others followed. Not everyone, not even most people, but enough to suggest that something had taken root. As the meeting finally ended and people filed out, some approached Naomi directly. A few thanked her. More asked questions about specific situations. A handful argued, still defensive, still convinced this was an overreaction. Naomi engaged with all of them, knowing that change didn't happen in grand gestures but in these small, difficult human interactions. Gerald Foster approached last, his expression carefully neutral. "Ms. Brooks, I owe you an apology. The way I spoke earlier was out of line." "The way you dismissed complaints was out of line, Gerald. The way you spoke was just honest." He flinched. "I want to understand. I really do. But I'm struggling with the idea that I've been doing harm when I thought I was doing my job well." That's the hardest thing to accept, isn't it? That we can be good people with good intentions and still participate in harmful systems. Naomi's voice softened slightly. "Gerald, I'm not asking you to hate yourself or carry guilt that paralyzes you. I'm asking you to look clearly at patterns you've been too close to see and commit to doing better going forward. And if I can't, if I've been in this industry too long to change my thinking, then you find another industry, because this company is changing, with or without you." He nodded slowly and walked away, shoulders slightly bent, a man confronting the possibility that his entire career had been built on a foundation with cracks he'd never examined. Jessica waited until the room was nearly empty before approaching. "Ms. Brooks, I know you said I should show you change through action, not words. But I need you to know something. I've spent the past 3 days reviewing every transaction I've processed since I started. I found patterns I'm ashamed of. I questioned minority customers more often. I asked for additional ID more frequently. I flagged transactions as potentially suspicious at higher rates. I didn't see it while I was doing it, but looking back, it's undeniable." "What did you do with that information?" "I documented it, every instance I could find, and I submitted it to Catherine as evidence for the investigation. Because if I want to be part of the solution, I have to be honest about being part of the problem first." Naomi studied the young woman's face, seeing genuine remorse mixed with determination. That took courage. It took shame, but maybe shame can be useful if it motivates change. Maybe it can. Just don't let it become an excuse to give up. Naomi touched Jessica's shoulder briefly. "Keep doing the work, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." That evening, back in her office, Naomi reviewed the feedback forms from the training session. The responses ranged from enthusiastic support to grudging acceptance to outright hostility. One respondent wrote, "This is reverse discrimination against people who've built their careers on experience and judgment." Another wrote, "Finally, someone is willing to name what we've all known was happening. Thank you for your courage." Catherine knocked and entered without waiting for permission. The preliminary numbers from the first week of demographic tracking are in. And? Exactly what we expected. Disparities across multiple metrics at 17 branches. Northgate is actually one of the worst. Derek's going to have a difficult conversation coming. Derek's going to have a choice. Adjust his practices or find new employment. Catherine sat down heavily. "Naomi, I have to ask, how long can you sustain this? The board is restless. Caldwell is actively lobbying against you. Shareholders are asking questions about the cost of reforms. At some point, the resistance is going to reach critical mass. Let it reach critical mass. Let them make their choice and show everyone exactly what they value." Naomi looked out at the city lights beginning to glow as dusk settled. "Catherine, I've spent my entire career navigating spaces that weren't designed for me, proving myself to people who assumed I didn't belong. I've smiled through microaggressions, excused casual racism as ignorance, accepted incremental progress as victory. I'm done. I'm not smiling anymore. I'm not excusing anymore. And I'm not accepting incremental progress when we need fundamental change. Even if it costs you everything? Especially then. Because if I back down now, what message does that send? That discrimination is acceptable as long as you don't get caught? That change is only important until it becomes inconvenient? That the CEO's dignity matters, but regular customers' dignity is negotiable?" Naomi shook her head. "No, I'd rather lose this job standing up than keep it by sitting down." Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Dinner's ready when you are. Also, the video hit 3 million views. You're officially viral." She smiled tiredly and typed back, "Fame is exhausting. Be home in 20. The office was quiet now, most people gone for the day. Naomi sat in the silence, feeling the weight of what she'd started and what she'd committed to seeing through. Tomorrow there would be more resistance, more difficult conversations, more people who saw equity as a threat instead of a foundation. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel something close to satisfaction. The training had been hard, confrontational, uncomfortable. People had been angry and defensive and scared, but they'd also been engaged. They'd asked questions, shared struggles, admitted flaws. That was more than she'd expected and less than she needed, which meant the work was just beginning. As she gathered her things to leave, her phone rang one more time. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, but decided to answer. Ms. Brooks, this is Diane Patterson. You don't know me, but my husband was the customer you saw at the Riverside branch, the one who got served without questions. Naomi's hand tightened on the phone. I remember. He told me what happened. He saw the whole thing, and he's been sick about it ever since, knowing he got treated one way while you got treated completely differently. Diane's voice shook slightly. We're white, Ms. Brooks. We've never had to think about whether a bank would serve us or whether we'd be questioned for accessing our own money. But watching what happened to you, hearing about it afterward, it opened our eyes to things we've been privileged enough to ignore. Why are you calling? Because we pulled our accounts from Pinnacle, all of them, and we sent letters to the board explaining exactly why. We told them that we won't be customers of a company that treats people the way you were treated, that we can't, in good conscience, benefit from a system that discriminates against others. Diane paused. I know it's a small thing. I know it doesn't change what you experienced. But I wanted you to know that what you're doing matters. It's making people who've never had to think about discrimination start thinking about it. After she hung up, Naomi sat with those words, letting them settle over the exhaustion and the anger and the determination. Change came slowly, in pieces, through countless small actions that accumulated into momentum. One customer pulling accounts, one employee documenting their biases, one training session forcing uncomfortable truths into the open. She thought about Mitchell Harrington, probably sitting in his house right now, maybe understanding what he'd lost, maybe still convinced he'd been treated unfairly. She thought about Todd Brennan, fighting his suspension, building his case, refusing to see the patterns he'd enabled. She thought about Richard Caldwell, working behind the scenes to undermine reforms, protecting a system that had always worked for him. And she thought about Jessica and Marcus and Kendra and Margaret, all of them choosing to do the hard work of change instead of the easy work of denial. The battle was far from over. But for the first time since walking into that branch 3 days ago, Naomi felt like maybe, possibly, they had a chance at winning it. She turned off the lights and headed home, knowing tomorrow would bring new fights, but feeling ready to face them. Tomorrow arrived with the weight of inevitability, and with it came the call Naomi had been expecting since the board meeting. Richard Caldwell's assistant, her voice professionally neutral, requested Naomi's presence at an emergency board session scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon. No agenda provided, no explanation offered, just the thinly veiled threat wrapped in corporate courtesy. Naomi sat at her desk, coffee growing cold in her hand, and considered the chessboard she'd been playing on for the past week. Caldwell had been making calls, building alliances, whispering concerns about her leadership style, her rush to judgment, her willingness to sacrifice business interests for social causes. She'd known this moment was coming. The only question was whether she'd built enough support to survive it. James appeared in her doorway, his expression grim. You heard. I heard. Caldwell's been working the board hard. He's got at least 4 votes lined up to call for your resignation. How many votes does he need? 7 for a no-confidence motion, 9 to actually remove you. Naomi did the math. 12 board members total. If Caldwell had 4 plus himself, he needed 2 more to wound her and 4 more to finish her. The margins were uncomfortably thin. Where does the rest of the board stand? Thomas is with you, obviously. Patricia is leaning your direction but worried about shareholder reaction. Stephen is genuinely undecided. The others are either in Caldwell's pocket or waiting to see which way the wind blows. James crossed his arms. Naomi, you need to go into this meeting with a strategy beyond righteous indignation. I have a strategy. Which is? Tell the truth and let them decide if they can live with the alternative. James closed his eyes briefly. That's not a strategy. That's a suicide note. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only move that matters. Naomi stood and walked to the window, looking down at the street below where people moved through their days, unaware of the battle being waged 40 floors above them. James, I appreciate your concern. I really do. But I didn't take this job to maintain comfortable lives. I took it to build something better. And if the board decides that better is too expensive or too controversial or too uncomfortable, then they should find a CEO who's willing to settle for less. You're really willing to fall on your sword over this? I'm willing to stand on my principles. If that looks like falling on my sword to everyone else, so be it. The hours between morning and the board meeting crawled by with agonizing slowness. Naomi reviewed the equity reports Catherine had compiled, the data showing measurable improvement in some branches and stubborn resistance in others. Derek Williamson at Northgate had implemented changes immediately, his branch showing a 40% reduction in discriminatory service patterns in just 1 week. Gerald Foster's region showed minimal movement, suggesting either deliberate obstruction or complete incompetence. At 1:30, Catherine knocked and entered with her tablet. The third-party auditors finished their preliminary review. You need to see this before the meeting. Naomi read through the findings, her jaw tightening with each page. The auditors had uncovered not just discriminatory service patterns, but evidence of deliberate policy violations. Multiple branches had been coaching employees to use code words when flagging minority customers for additional scrutiny. Internal emails showed regional managers sharing tips for denying services to high-risk clients, with risk defined by demographics rather than financial indicators. This is worse than we thought, Naomi said quietly. Much worse, and it goes higher than Brennan. At least 3 other regional VPs were part of the email chain. They knew exactly what was happening and actively encouraged it. Does Caldwell know about this report? He requested it this morning. I sent it an hour ago. Naomi looked up sharply. You sent it to him before showing me? I sent it to the entire board simultaneously. They all have the same information you do. Catherine's expression was fierce. Let him try to paint you as overreacting when the evidence shows you were actually understating the problem. At 2 o'clock precisely, Naomi walked into the boardroom. The atmosphere was funeral thick, every face carefully composed, every greeting professionally distant. Caldwell sat at the head of the table, the audit report prominently displayed on his tablet, his expression revealing nothing. Ms. Brooks, thank you for joining us. His formality was a warning. Richard, board members. Richard, have you read the audit report Catherine distributed this morning? I've reviewed it, yes. Then you're aware that the suspensions weren't premature. They were overdue. The audit confirms everything Ms. Brooks alleged and reveals additional problems we weren't even aware of. Caldwell's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The audit reveals alleged problems that require further investigation before we take dramatic action that could expose us to wrongful termination lawsuits. The audit reveals documented discrimination that exposes us to civil rights lawsuits, regulatory sanctions, and criminal liability if we don't act immediately, Thomas countered. You want to talk about risk exposure? The real risk is doing nothing while employees violate federal law. The real risk, Caldwell said, his voice hardening, is allowing this company to be used as a platform for social activism instead of being run as a business. We're a bank, not a civil rights organization. The room went very quiet. Naomi felt something shift, a line being drawn with such clarity that no one could pretend neutrality anymore. Richard, what exactly are you proposing? Stephen Park asked carefully. I'm proposing that we need leadership focused on running this bank profitably and sustainably, not on conducting social experiments that alienate employees and customers. Caldwell looked directly at Naomi. Ms. Brooks has allowed a personal experience to cloud her judgment and drive decisions that prioritize ideology over business sense. Ideology, Naomi repeated softly. Is that what we're calling basic human decency now? I'm calling it what it is, a crusade that's costing us money, damaging our reputation, and creating division where we need unity. The division already existed, I just made it visible. Naomi opened her tablet to the demographic data. Richard, Our minority customer base has declined by 18% over the past 3 years. Do you know why? Because they've been systematically pushed out by discriminatory service practices. We've been hemorrhaging customers and revenue because we created an environment where people who don't look a certain way aren't welcome. That's speculation. It's data. Exit surveys from closed accounts show that 43% of minority customers cited poor service or feeling unwelcome as their primary reason for leaving. That's not speculation. That's our customers telling us exactly why we're losing their business. Board member Helen Rogers, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. I've been reviewing the financial impact projections. The reforms Ms. Brooks has proposed will cost approximately $8 million in the first year, primarily for training, oversight, and system upgrades. However, if we can reduce customer attrition in minority markets by even 10%, we'd recover that cost within 18 months and generate significant revenue growth afterward. That's a big if, Caldwell argued. It's a conservative if, Helen replied. Communities of color represent the fastest growing demographic in our service area. If we continue alienating them, we're not just failing morally, we're failing strategically. Caldwell shifted tactics. Even if the financial case can be made, the manner in which these changes have been implemented is problematic. Suspending employees publicly, conducting training sessions that amount to public shaming, making unilateral decisions without board consultation, this is not how a CEO should operate. The manner in which discrimination was allowed to flourish is what's problematic, Naomi said. The manner in which complaints were dismissed, employees were trained to profile customers, and leadership turned a blind eye to civil rights violations. That's what we should be discussing, Richard, not whether I hurt feelings by demanding accountability. You've alienated half the management team. I've made clear that discrimination won't be tolerated. If that alienates people, they're welcome to find employment elsewhere. You can't run a company by driving away experienced leaders. I can't run a company that breaks the law and betrays its values, regardless of how experienced the people breaking that law might be. The argument was escalating, voices rising, the pretense of professional courtesy crumbling. Other board members tried to interject, but Caldwell and Naomi were locked in a confrontation that had been building for years, finally erupting into the open. You're destroying what I've spent 12 years building, Caldwell said, his voice tight with anger. What you've spent 12 years building included systemic discrimination, Naomi replied. If addressing that destroys your legacy, maybe your legacy wasn't worth preserving. Caldwell stood abruptly. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in Ms. Brooks' leadership. The room froze. Thomas started to object, but Patricia held up her hand. Richard, before we proceed with any votes, I'd like to hear from some of the people most affected by these changes. Ms. Brooks, have you brought anyone who can speak to the implementation and impact of the reforms? Naomi nodded. She'd anticipated this moment, prepared for it. Catherine Valdez is outside with several employees who volunteered to share their perspectives. With the board's permission? Caldwell looked like he wanted to refuse, but several board members were already nodding. He sat back down heavily. Fine. Let's hear from your carefully selected supporters. Catherine entered with 5 people: Margaret Chen, Jessica, Marcus Thompson, Kendra Williams, and Derek Williamson. They arranged themselves along the wall, clearly nervous about addressing the board, but determined nonetheless. Margaret spoke first. My name is Margaret Chen. I've been with this company for 20 years, working my way up from teller to senior customer service representative. For the past 3 years, I've filed reports about discriminatory practices at my branch. Every single report was dismissed or minimized. I was told I was being oversensitive, that I didn't understand proper risk management, that I should focus on my own work instead of creating problems. Her voice strengthened as she continued. When Ms. Brooks was discriminated against at the Riverside branch, it was the same pattern I'd been reporting for years. The only difference was that she had the power to do something about it. She didn't just fix one incident. She acknowledged a systemic problem and committed to real change. For the first time in 20 years, I feel like someone in leadership actually cares about treating all customers with dignity. Jessica went next, her voice shaking but clear. I was part of the problem. I'm the teller who served Ms. Brooks poorly, who questioned her legitimacy, who participated in her humiliation. I thought I was following protocol, But really, I was following bias. The training we received this week was uncomfortable and painful and necessary. I had to confront my own prejudices, my own assumptions, my own role in perpetuating discrimination. That wasn't easy, but it was essential. And Ms. Brooks didn't punish me for my mistakes. She gave me a chance to learn from them and do better. That's real leadership. Marcus Thompson spoke with quiet intensity. I'm a young black man working in this industry. I see how customers who look like me get treated differently. I've experienced it personally. I've watched it happen to others. When Ms. Brooks stood up and said this wasn't acceptable, when she put her own career on the line to demand change, it gave me hope that maybe this industry could be different, that maybe I could build a career here without constantly having to prove I belong. The reforms she's implementing aren't about politics or ideology. They're about basic fairness and equal treatment under the law. Kendra Williams addressed the board with the authority of someone who'd fought too many battles to be intimidated. I'm a black woman who's experienced discrimination both as an employee and as a customer. I've filed complaints that went nowhere. I've watched colleagues treat customers differently based on race. I've been told to be patient, that change takes time, that things are better than they used to be. But better than terrible is still not good enough. Ms. Brooks isn't asking for patience. She's demanding action, and she's backing up those demands with real consequences and real support. That's what leadership looks like. Derek Williamson was the last to speak, and his perspective carried different weight. I'm a branch manager who was called out during training for having discriminatory patterns in my service delivery. I was defensive at first. I thought I was being unfairly attacked, but when I actually looked at the data, when I examined my own decision-making honestly, I had to admit Ms. Brooks was right. I was applying different standards to different customers without even realizing it. The past week has been humbling and educational. My branch has already seen improvement in customer satisfaction among minority clients. We're serving people better, more fairly, more consistently. That's good for customers, good for employees, and good for business. Ms. Brooks didn't destroy what we built. She fixed what was broken. After they finished, Caldwell sat silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Thank you for your perspectives. You're dismissed. As the 5 employees filed out, Catherine lingered near the door. Caldwell noticed. Ms. Valdez, you're dismissed as well. With respect, Chairman Caldwell, I'm an executive officer of this company. Unless the board votes to remove me, I belong in this room during discussions about company policy. Caldwell's face flushed, but he couldn't argue the point. Catherine took a seat along the wall, tablet ready, expression implacable. Patricia spoke into the tense silence. Richard, you called for a vote of no confidence. Are you still pursuing that? Caldwell looked around the table, reading faces, calculating odds. Whatever he saw made him reconsider. I think we need more discussion first. Then let's discuss, Thomas said. Specifically, let's discuss the audit findings that show at least 4 regional VPs were actively encouraging discriminatory practices. Let's discuss the legal liability we face if we don't take immediate action. Let's discuss the fact that Ms. Brooks' reforms aren't radical. They're barely sufficient to comply with existing civil rights law. We're already complying with civil rights law, Caldwell protested. We're already violating civil rights law, Thomas corrected. The audit documents multiple violations of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, the Fair Housing Act, and potentially the Civil Rights Act. We're one lawsuit away from federal investigation, and you want to talk about Ms. Brooks being too aggressive? Helen pulled up financial projections on the main screen. I've run the numbers on several scenarios. If we continue current practices and face even one successful discrimination lawsuit, we're looking at minimum damages of $15 million, plus legal fees, plus regulatory fines, plus reputation damage that could cost us hundreds of millions in lost business. If we implement Ms. Brooks' reforms, and they work, we gain market share in growing demographics and build a reputation as an equitable employer and service provider. If we implement the reforms and they don't work, we've spent $8 million trying to do the right thing. The risk-reward calculation isn't even close. You're assuming the reforms will actually address the problems, Caldwell argued. I'm assuming that treating customers equally is both legally required and commercially sound. If that's a controversial assumption, we have bigger problems than I realized. Stephen Park had been silent throughout, but now he looked at Naomi directly. Ms. Brooks, let me ask you something. If the board votes to continue supporting these reforms but asks you to implement them more gradually, with more consultation, more input from affected managers, would you be willing to adjust your approach? Naomi considered the question carefully. It was an olive branch, an attempt at compromise, a way to save face all around. It was also a trap that would slow progress to a crawl and give opponents time to undermine everything she'd started. Stephen, I appreciate the question, but here's my concern with gradual implementation. We're not talking about optional improvements or nice-to-have upgrades. We're talking about civil rights compliance. You can't gradually comply with the law. You can't ask for more time to stop discriminating. Either we treat customers equally or we don't. Either we hold employees accountable for violations or we don't. There's no middle ground on basic human rights. But there might be middle ground on process, Stephen pressed, on how decisions are made, how employees are engaged, how concerns are addressed. I'm open to input on implementation details. I'm not open to delaying action while we debate whether action is necessary. Naomi looked at each board member in turn. The audit makes clear that we have serious, systemic problems. Every day we delay addressing those problems is another day we violate customers' rights, expose ourselves to liability, and fail to live up to our stated values. I understand that change is uncomfortable. I understand that accountability feels threatening to people who've operated without it. But discomfort and threat to the status quo aren't reasons to move slowly. They're reasons to move decisively. Patricia nodded slowly. I move that we endorse Ms. Brooks' equity reforms in full and provide the necessary budget and authority to implement them company-wide. Second, Thomas said immediately. Discussion? Caldwell's voice was flat. I have a question, Helen said. Ms. Brooks, what specific metrics will you use to measure success? How will we know if these reforms are working? We'll track multiple indicators. Demographic data on service delivery, comparing wait times, approval rates, and service quality across customer populations. Customer satisfaction surveys with specific questions about fair treatment. Employee retention and satisfaction, particularly among minority staff. Complaint patterns and resolution rates. Revenue trends in minority markets. We'll report quarterly to the board with full transparency about what's working and what needs adjustment. And if the data shows the reforms aren't working, then we'll revise our approach based on evidence. But I'm confident the data will show improvement because the reforms are based on best practices that have worked in other organizations facing similar challenges. Caldwell made one last attempt. This is going to alienate a significant portion of our workforce. The employees who feel attacked, who think they're being punished for doing their jobs, are welcome to their feelings, Naomi interrupted. But they're not welcome to discriminate against customers. If they can't do their jobs without violating civil rights law, they need different jobs. And if that means some turnover, so be it. I'd rather have fewer employees who treat customers with dignity than more employees who don't. The vote was called. 9 hands went up in support. 2 opposed. Caldwell and one of his longtime allies. 1 abstention. The reforms were approved. Caldwell sat very still, absorbing his defeat. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of finality. I'll be submitting my resignation from the board effective at the end of this quarter. The announcement hung in the air. Several board members looked shocked. Patricia started to speak, but Caldwell held up his hand. I've served on this board for 12 years. I've guided this company through expansion, crisis, and transformation. But it's clear that my vision for what this company should be is no longer aligned with the direction leadership wants to take it. Rather than continue to be an obstacle to changes others believe are necessary, I'll step aside and let you proceed without opposition. It was phrased as gracious resignation, but delivered as condemnation. Naomi recognized the tactic, positioned himself as the reasonable one driven out by zealots, set himself up for sympathy and vindication if the reforms failed. Your service has been valued, Patricia said carefully, but if you feel this is the right decision, the board will respect it. After the meeting ended, Naomi stood by the window watching the city lights come on as darkness settled over the downtown. She'd won, but the victory felt less like triumph and more like exhaustion. Caldwell's resignation removed an obstacle, but created a vacancy that would need to be filled with someone who actually supported equity instead of just tolerating it. The reforms were approved, but would face resistance at every level of implementation. The data would show progress, but progress would be uneven, contested, constantly requiring defense. Catherine approached quietly. You did it. Did I? Or did I just win the first battle in a very long war? Both. But both matters. The first battle had to be won before the war could be fought. James joined them, looking relieved but wary. Caldwell's going to be a problem even after he leaves the board. He's got connections, influence, friends, and media. He's going to position himself as the voice of reason driven out by extremism. Let him, Naomi said. Let him explain to the public why he resigned rather than support civil rights compliance. Let him make that case and see how it plays. Her phone buzzed, a text from Marcus Thompson, the young teller. Just heard about the vote. Thank you for not backing down. You have no idea how much this means to people like me. Another message from Martha Weinstein. The video is up to 5 million views, but more importantly, 3 other customers have come forward with their own stories of discrimination at Pinnacle branches. This is bigger than one incident. You've opened a door. And then one from someone unexpected. Mitchell Harrington. Miss Brooks, I know I have no right to contact you. I'm not asking for my job back or for forgiveness I don't deserve. I just wanted you to know that I've spent the past week really thinking about what happened, about what I did, about who I've been. You were right, about all of it. I don't know if I can change, but I'm going to try. Thank you for holding up a mirror I should have looked into years ago. Naomi stared at the message for a long time. Apologies were cheap without change, she'd told Jessica, but the first step toward change was acknowledging the need for it. Maybe Mitchell was just covering his bases, positioning himself for a wrongful termination lawsuit, or maybe, possibly, he was beginning to understand what he'd lost and why. She didn't respond to his message. Some things didn't require response, just witnessing. Over the next 3 months, the transformation of Pinnacle Financial Group played out in spreadsheets and training sessions, in awkward conversations and difficult confrontations, in small victories and stubborn resistances. Derek Williamson's branch became a model, showing measurable improvement in customer satisfaction across all demographics. Gerald Foster was eventually terminated when the audit revealed he'd been actively coaching employees to avoid documentation of discriminatory practices. 2 other regional VPs resigned rather than comply with new oversight requirements. But there were also surprises. Paul Henderson, the manager who'd pushed back during training, submitted a detailed proposal for improving equity metrics at his branch. Jessica was promoted to senior teller after demonstrating consistent commitment to fair service. Kendra Williams was appointed to the newly formed Equity Council and became a powerful voice for change from within. The customer base began to shift. Minority customers who'd closed accounts started returning, cautiously testing whether the changes were real or cosmetic. Word spread through communities that had felt unwelcome, and slowly, painfully slowly, trust began to rebuild. 6 months after that morning at the Riverside branch, Naomi returned to complete the withdrawal she'd originally come for. The branch looked the same: marble floors, high ceilings, glass walls, but the atmosphere had changed. The staff greeted every customer with the same warmth. Wait times had equalized. Complaints had dropped dramatically. Jessica was working the counter. When she saw Naomi, her face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Ms. Brooks, it's good to see you again." "Jessica, how have you been?" "Busy, learning, growing." Jessica smiled. "Ready to help you with that withdrawal, finally?" "Actually, I made it online last week. I'm just here to check in." "Check up on us, you mean?" "Is there a difference?" Jessica laughed. "Probably not. But for what it's worth, we're doing better. Really better. Margaret is training new employees on equitable service practices. We've had 3 customer appreciation events in minority neighborhoods. And last week, a customer told me it was the first time he'd felt truly welcome in a bank. That meant everything. Naomi looked around the branch, seeing past the physical space to the culture that had shifted beneath it. It wasn't perfect. There were still problems to solve, biases to confront, habits to break. But it was different. Measurably, meaningfully different. "Keep doing the work," Naomi said, "even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." "We will. You taught us that much at least." As Naomi left the branch, her phone rang. The new board chairman, Patricia Morrison, calling with an update on the search for Caldwell's replacement. They'd narrowed it to 3 candidates, all of whom had demonstrated commitment to equity and inclusion in their previous roles. I want your input on the final decision, Patricia said. This is too important to get wrong. Send me their backgrounds. I'll review them by tomorrow. Naomi, I want to say something. When you first became CEO, I wasn't sure you were ready. You were young, relatively new to the executive team, stepping into a role that traditionally went to people with more tenure. I supported your appointment, but I had doubts. And now? Now I think you're exactly the leader this company needed, not because you've been perfect, but because you've been willing to stand for something that matters even when it was costly. That's rare. Don't lose it. That evening, Naomi sat with Marcus on their back patio, wine glasses catching the last light of sunset. He'd been following the transformation closely, offering support and perspective, celebrating wins and commiserating over setbacks. How does it feel? He asked. 6 months later, reforms in place, measurable progress happening. How does it feel? Naomi considered the question carefully. Incomplete. We've made progress, but there's so much further to go. We've changed policies, but changing culture takes years. We've held some people accountable, but others slipped through the cracks. We've improved metrics, but statistics don't capture individual experiences of dignity or indignity. That's not really an answer to my question. How does it feel? It feels like I'm finally doing the job I was hired to do. Not just managing a bank, but building an organization that serves all people with equal respect. It feels exhausting and necessary and worth it. She looked at him. Did I make the right call? Pushing as hard as I did, risking everything, forcing confrontations that could have destroyed my career? Marcus set down his wine glass and took her hand. You walked into a bank to withdraw your own money and were treated like a criminal because of the color of your skin. You could have revealed who you were immediately, scared them into submission, made them grovel, and moved on. Instead, you let the situation play out so you could see the truth of how they operated. Then you used your power not for revenge, but for reform. You didn't just fix what happened to you, you tried to fix the system that created that moment for you and for countless others. He squeezed her hand. So, yes, Naomi, you made the right call. Not the easy call, not the safe call, but the right one. She leaned against him, feeling the weight of 6 months lift slightly. The work would continue tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. There would be more resistance, more setbacks, more moments of wondering if the fight was worth the cost. But tonight, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose, Naomi allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in months. Not satisfaction exactly, not victory, but a quiet confidence that change was possible, that systems could be transformed, that the arc of justice could be bent by people willing to grab hold and pull. Her phone buzzed one last time. A message from an unknown number with a video attachment. She almost deleted it, but curiosity made her open it. The video showed a young black woman, maybe 20 years old, walking into a Pinnacle financial branch. The woman approached the counter with visible nervousness, requested to open an account, and was greeted with warmth and efficiency. No additional questions, no suspicious looks, just professional, courteous service. At the end, as the woman left with her new account paperwork, she turned to whoever was filming and gave a thumbs up, her smile brilliant with relief and joy. The message below the video read, "My daughter just opened her first bank account, first time she's ever been in a bank without me. I was scared for her, worried she'd be treated poorly because of her race. But she was treated with respect. Thank you for making that possible. Thank you for fighting for our daughters." Naomi watched the video 3 times, each viewing bringing fresh tears she didn't bother to hide. This was why. This young woman's smile, this mother's relief, this small moment of dignity that should have been guaranteed but had to be fought for. This was why every difficult conversation, every exhausting confrontation, every risk taken mattered. Marcus watched over her shoulder. That's beautiful. That's everything. Naomi wiped her eyes. That's what we're building toward. A world where that young woman walks into any bank, any business, any space, and expects to be treated with respect because that's the default, not the exception. You're building it, one policy change, one training session, one difficult conversation at a time. The next morning, Naomi returned to her office to find a package waiting on her desk. Inside was a framed photograph, the Riverside branch on the morning of the incident, taken from across the street. Someone had captured the moment she stood at that counter, surrounded by staff and customers, every face visible in the glass-walled lobby. Below the photograph, a plaque read, "The day everything changed, never forget what matters more than comfort." There was no note indicating who sent it, but Naomi suspected Margaret or perhaps Jessica. She hung it on the wall behind her desk where she could see it every day, a reminder of why she'd chosen this fight and what she was fighting for. The months that followed brought more challenges and more progress in uneven measures. The Equity Council published its first quarterly report showing significant improvement in service delivery across demographics. 3 branches were flagged for continued problems and received intensive intervention. Employee satisfaction surveys showed increased confidence in reporting discrimination and increased trust in leadership's commitment to addressing it. Revenue grew as minority customers returned and word spread that Pinnacle was different now, actually different, measurably and meaningfully different. The financial case for equity that Helen had projected proved conservative. The company exceeded growth targets in minority markets by 18% in the first year. There were still problems. An employee in the southern region was terminated for using racial slurs toward a customer. A manager in the Midwest fought his suspension for discriminatory lending practices, filing a lawsuit that Pinnacle settled quietly with an NDA. 2 branches showed stubborn resistance to demographic tracking, requiring leadership changes to enforce compliance. But the trajectory was clear. The culture was shifting, the systems were changing, and most importantly, customers were experiencing the difference in tangible ways that mattered. A year after that morning at Riverside, Naomi stood before the annual shareholders meeting to present results. The room was packed, shareholders eager to hear whether the controversial reforms had paid off or proven to be the expensive distraction critics had predicted. She didn't bury the lead. 1 year ago, I experienced discrimination at one of our own branches. That experience revealed systemic problems in how we serve our customers and manage our employees. Today, I'm here to report on the comprehensive reforms we've implemented to address those problems and to share the results of those reforms. The presentation that followed was data-heavy, showing demographic service patterns before and after implementation, customer satisfaction trends, employee retention rates, complaint resolution metrics, and financial performance. Every metric showed improvement, some dramatically, some incrementally, but all moving in the right direction. We invested $8 million in equity reforms, Naomi concluded. That investment generated $23 million in new revenue from previously underserved markets, reduced legal liability exposure by an estimated $50 million, improved employee retention saving approximately $4 million in turnover costs, and positioned us as the employer and service provider of choice in growing demographic segments. The return on investment isn't just financial, though the financial case is compelling. The return is measured in customers who feel welcome, employees who feel supported, and a company culture that aligns our practices with our stated values. The applause was substantial, though not universal. Some shareholders still believed the reforms were unnecessary or too expensive, but the numbers were undeniable, and shareholders loved numbers. During the Q&A session, an older white man stood up, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated wealth and assumed authority. "Ms. Brooks, you've presented impressive results, but I wonder if you've considered the cost of alienating traditional customers who may feel uncomfortable with these changes. Have you tracked any backlash or lost business from people who disagree with your approach?" Naomi met his eyes steadily. "Sir, I've considered it carefully, and here's what the data shows. We lost approximately 400 customers who explicitly cited our equity reforms as their reason for closing accounts. Those 400 customers represented about $6 million in annual deposits. In the same period, we gained over 2,000 new customers from previously underserved communities representing $19 million in new deposits. So yes, some people were uncomfortable with our commitment to equal service, and were financially stronger without their business." The shareholder sat down without further comment. The message was clear: bigotry was bad business, and Pinnacle was choosing profit through inclusion over appeasement of discrimination. After the meeting, as shareholders filed out and Naomi gathered her materials, a young woman approached. She looked familiar, but Naomi couldn't place her immediately. "Ms. Brooks, I'm Alicia Patterson. Diane Patterson is my mother. She's the one who called you after the incident, whose husband was the customer who got served without questions while you were denied. I remember. How is your mother? She's well. She wanted me to give you this. Alicia handed over an envelope. She's been volunteering with a civil rights organization, speaking about what she witnessed and learned. She says watching what happened to you and seeing how you responded changed her understanding of privilege and complicity. She wanted you to know you've inspired people to examine their own lives and make different choices. Inside the envelope was a letter from Diane and a donation receipt showing a substantial contribution to a racial justice organization made in Naomi's name. The letter detailed Diane's journey from unconscious privilege to active allyship, from passive observation to engaged advocacy. It ended with simple words. Thank you for teaching me to see what I'd been avoiding looking at. I'm trying to do better. Naomi folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her portfolio. Change rippled outward in ways that couldn't always be predicted or measured. One incident had sparked institutional reform, which had inspired individual transformation, which would influence countless future interactions in ways no spreadsheet could capture. 2 years after that morning at Riverside, the branch underwent renovation. The physical changes were modest, updated technology, refreshed decor, new signage, but the symbolic weight was enormous. The reopening celebration featured speeches from staff, customers, and community leaders. Jessica spoke about her journey from complicity to commitment. Margaret talked about persistence and vindication. Derek Williamson shared data showing his branch's transformation from one of the worst offenders to one of the best performers on equity metrics. Naomi was invited to cut the ribbon. She stood before the crowd, staff in uniform, customers from the neighborhood, media documenting the moment, and remembered standing at that counter 2 years ago, feeling the weight of judgment, experiencing the sharp edge of discrimination, making the choice to fight instead of flee. This branch looks different today, Naomi said. New paint, new technology, new signage. But the real difference isn't what you can see on the surface. It's what you feel when you walk through those doors. 2 years ago, customers were judged before they were served, questioned before they were trusted, made to feel unwelcome in a space that should have invited them in. Today, this branch represents what banking should be: professional, equitable, focused on service rather than suspicion. That transformation didn't happen by accident. It happened because people chose to do the hard work of examining their biases, changing their behaviors, and committing to treating every customer with dignity. She cut the ribbon, cameras flashed, people applauded. But the moment Naomi would remember most came afterward, when an elderly black man approached her with tears in his eyes. I've been banking in this neighborhood for 47 years, he said. I've been questioned, suspected, watched, and dismissed more times than I can count. Last week, I came in here to deposit my Social Security check, and for the first time in 47 years, I was just treated like a customer. Not a suspicious customer, not a problem to be managed, just a person doing normal banking business. I wanted to thank you for making that possible. Naomi shook his hand, feeling the weight of his words settle over her like a blessing and a burden. You shouldn't have had to wait 47 years for basic respect. No, I shouldn't have, but I'm grateful it finally came while I'm still here to experience it. That night, Naomi sat at her desk in the quiet office, looking at the photograph from that morning 2 years ago. The woman in that image looked so composed, so controlled, giving no hint of the anger, hurt, and determination roiling beneath the surface. She'd been tested that day in ways she hadn't expected, forced to choose between dignity and discretion, between comfort and confrontation. She'd chosen confrontation, and in choosing it, she'd started something larger than one incident, one branch, one company. She'd opened a conversation about equity and discrimination that rippled through the industry, inspiring other institutions to examine their own practices, encouraging other leaders to demand more from their organizations. The work wasn't done. It would never be fully done because bias was a constant pressure requiring constant resistance. But the trajectory had changed. The needle had moved, and thousands of customers were walking into branches expecting respect instead of hoping for it. Naomi's phone buzzed. A message from Thomas, now board chairman after Patricia's retirement. Board meeting tomorrow. We're voting on expansion into 3 new markets with majority-minority populations. Your recommendation carries the day. Well done. She smiled and typed back, not my recommendation, just following the data and doing what's right. Same thing when you're the one recommending it. Maybe it was. Maybe aligning business interests with human values wasn't as complicated as people made it out to be. Maybe profit and principle could coexist when leaders chose to make them compatible instead of claiming they were opposed. Marcus appeared in the doorway with 2 glasses of wine. You're working late again. Just thinking. About how far we've come, about how far we still have to go, about whether any of it actually matters in the long run. She accepted the wine glass he offered. Does it matter, Marcus? All this work, all these battles, all these small victories, will they last? Or will the next CEO undo everything we've built? Marcus settled into the chair across from her desk. You're asking the wrong question. The right question isn't whether changes will last forever. Nothing lasts forever. The right question is whether you made things better while you had the power to do so. And Naomi, the answer to that question is absolutely yes. You made things better. For customers, for employees, for communities that had been excluded. Maybe the next CEO maintains what you built. Maybe they don't. But the people who experienced respect and dignity because of your choices, they'll carry that forward. The employees who learn to serve equitably, they'll take those skills wherever they go. The culture change you created, it becomes the baseline that future leaders have to either meet or explain why they're falling short of. She reached across the desk and took his hand. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just finally started listening. They sat together in the quiet office, the city lights glowing beyond the windows, the photograph of that transformative morning hanging on the wall as a reminder of what was possible when principle met power. Naomi thought about Mitchell Harrington, hopefully learning to be better, about Jessica and Marcus Thompson and Kendra, building careers in an industry that was slowly, painfully becoming more equitable, about Margaret, vindicated after years of being dismissed, about the young woman opening her first account with confidence instead of fear, about Diane Patterson, transformed from passive observer to active ally, about the elderly man banking without suspicion for the first time in 47 years. These were the measures that mattered more than quarterly reports or shareholder returns. These were the metrics of a life spent fighting for something larger than personal success. The work would continue tomorrow. There would be new challenges, new resistance, new moments requiring courage and conviction. But tonight, in this moment, Naomi allowed herself to feel something close to satisfaction. She'd walked into a bank to withdraw her money and been denied her dignity. She'd used that moment not for revenge, but for reform, not for personal vindication, but for systemic change. And in doing so, she'd proven that power wielded with principle could transform institutions, that courage in the face of discrimination could inspire others to stand up, and that the long, difficult work of building equity was worth every uncomfortable conversation, every difficult confrontation, every risk taken in pursuit of justice. The envelope of cash she'd originally come to withdraw sat in her desk drawer, never used, kept as a reminder of how a simple transaction had become a transformative moment. Tomorrow, she'd deposit it back into her account at the Riverside branch, completing a circle that had begun 2 years ago with humiliation and ended with hope. But tonight, she finished her wine with her husband, turned off the office lights, and went home to rest, ready for whatever battles tomorrow would bring, confident that fighting them was worth the cost.